My name is Lydia, 33 years old, and at the reading of my grandfather's will, laughter and cheers filled the room as my siblings inherited absolute fortunes. When it was my turn, the lawyer simply cleared his throat and slid a blank envelope across the table. Inside was a single index card with a phone number. Maybe it is for some charity, my sister teased, inspecting her perfect manicure. I dialed the number the moment I reached my car, and a deep, calm voice answered on the first ring. Finally, you have called heir. It is time. What my family did not know was that this tiny piece of paper was about to dismantle their entire empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who ended up holding all the cards. The air inside the mahogany-paneled office of my grandfather's estate lawyer was thick with anticipation and the overwhelming scent of expensive leather. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, casting a gray, muted light over the massive conference table. I sat quietly at the far end, my hands folded neatly in my lap, maintaining the careful, detached composure I had perfected over a decade working as a freelance financial fraud investigator. I was used to sitting in rooms full of tense people waiting for numbers to be revealed. The only difference today was that the numbers belonged to my own family. To my left sat my brother Preston. At 36 years old, he already carried himself like the undisputed king of the world, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit and leaning back with an air of absolute entitlement. He was the golden boy, the firstborn son, who had been groomed since birth to take over Harrison Logistics, the massive supply chain empire my grandfather had built from a single delivery truck. Across from him sat my younger sister, Savannah. She was 30 years old and entirely consumed by her social status. She was currently scrolling on her phone, utterly bored by the legal formalities but eager for the final payout. Flanking them were my parents, Catherine and Charles, beaming with pride as they looked at their two favored children. They barely glanced in my direction. I was, as always, the invisible middle child. Mr. Carmichael, the elderly attorney who had managed my grandfather's affairs for over 40 years, sat at the head of the table. He adjusted his reading glasses and picked up the heavy-bound document that dictated the future of our family. "We will begin with the primary business assets," Mr. Carmichael announced, his voice raspy and formal. "To my grandson, Preston Harrison, I leave the entirety of my controlling shares in Harrison Logistics, including all operational warehouses, the active fleet, and the title of Chief Executive Officer." Preston let out a breath he had clearly been holding and leaned forward to slap his hands on the table. He grinned broadly, looking at our father. "I told you, Dad." The old man knew what he was doing. Our father Charles nodded proudly, clapping Preston on the shoulder. "You earned it, son. You are going to take the company to the next level." I kept my face perfectly neutral, though my investigator instincts flared. Preston had been working as the vice president of operations for the last 5 years, and anyone with a basic understanding of corporate finance knew the company had been bleeding profits under his watch. He was arrogant, reckless with company funds, and entirely unqualified to run a logistics empire. But in my family, reality always took a back seat to the preferred narrative. Preston was the golden boy, so Preston was declared a business genius. Mr. Carmichael cleared his throat again, turning the heavy parchment page. Moving on to the liquid assets and real estate holdings. To my granddaughter, Savannah Harrison, I leave the sum of $15 million to be transferred immediately upon the execution of this document. Furthermore, I leave her the primary deeds to the Malibu beachfront estate and the penthouse in Manhattan. Savannah actually squealed, dropping her phone onto the table. $15 million. She clapped her hands together, looking at our mother. "Mom, I can finally start that luxury lifestyle brand I was telling you about. And the Malibu house is going to be perfect for the launch party." Catherine reached over and squeezed Savannah's hand, her face glowing with maternal pride. "It is exactly what you deserve, darling. Your grandfather wanted you to have the very best. You have always had such wonderful taste." The room buzzed with congratulatory murmurs. Preston and Savannah exchanged triumphant looks, their futures completely secured by wealth they had never truly worked to build. I sat in silence watching the performance. I did not feel jealous of the money. Through my work as a fraud investigator, I had built a comfortable, independent life for myself. I had my own clients, my own income, and a deep sense of self-reliance. But the blatant favoritism, the undeniable confirmation of my status as the outcast, still stung with a familiar dull ache. Mr. Carmichael looked down at the document and the room slowly fell quiet. The atmosphere shifted. The lawyer looked incredibly uncomfortable. He adjusted his glasses again, refusing to meet my eyes, and picked up a plain white envelope from the stack of files beside him. And finally, Mr. Carmichael said, his voice dropping slightly, "To my granddaughter, Lydia Harrison." Preston smirked, taking a sip from the crystal water glass in front of him. Savannah leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, watching me with a mixture of pity and amusement. Mr. Carmichael did not read from the heavy parchment document. Instead, he reached across the wide mahogany table and slid the plain white envelope toward me. It stopped right at the edge of my hands. "That is all," Mr. Carmichael said quietly. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions. You are to receive this envelope and nothing else. There are no monetary assets, no property deeds, and no company shares designated in your name." The silence in the room was absolute. I looked down at the blank envelope. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply picked it up and broke the seal. I reached inside and pulled out a single unlined index card. There was no letter of explanation. There was no final message of love or apology. There was only a 10-digit phone number written in black ink in my grandfather's distinctive sharp handwriting. Savannah let out a short, mocking laugh that cut through the quiet room. "A phone number. What is that? The hotline for a local charity? Well, Grandpa always said you needed to figure things out for yourself since you refused to join the family business." I looked up at her, my expression blank. "I refused to join the family business because I wanted to earn my own way," I said evenly. "I wanted a career based on my own skills, not my last name." Our mother, Catherine, scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere cardigan. "Do not pout, Lydia. You have always been the difficult one. You isolated yourself from this family the moment you decided your little investigation career was more important than us. Remember when you skipped Preston's engagement party to study for your fraud examiner exams? Actions have consequences. You cannot turn your back on your family and expect to be rewarded with the family wealth." I looked at my mother, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. I had skipped that engagement party because I was working 2 jobs to pay for my own certification exams. My parents had refused to help me with my tuition, claiming that if I wanted to pursue a useless career, instead of taking a desk job under Preston, I had to fund it myself. I had spent my entire 20s working tirelessly to build my reputation in the financial sector, earning certifications, and securing high-level corporate clients. I spent my days unraveling complex financial crimes, tracing hidden assets, and exposing corporate corruption. I was brilliant at what I did. But to my mother, I was just a stubborn disappointment who refused to fall in line. "I did not ask for a reward, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I just find it interesting that Grandpa would leave me completely out of the financial estate." Preston leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head. "It makes perfect sense to me. Grandpa built an empire. He wanted to leave it to the people who actually understand how to maintain an empire, not someone who spends her days looking at spreadsheets for other people's companies. You made your bed, Lydia. Now you get to sleep in it." I looked back down at the index card. A phone number. It made no sense. My grandfather was a hard, demanding man, but he was not cruel. He was a brilliant strategist, a man who never made a move without calculating 10 steps ahead. He respected my decision to become an investigator. In fact, he was the only person in the family who had ever asked me detailed questions about my work. Why would he humiliate me like this? Why leave me a meaningless piece of paper while handing my careless brother the keys to a logistics dynasty, unless my investigator brain whispered the paper is not meaningless? I carefully slid the index card back into the envelope and placed it in my purse. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I did not raise my voice or demand explanations. I looked at the lawyer, nodded respectfully, and then looked at my family. "Congratulations on your inheritance," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "I am sure you will all manage it exactly as you manage everything else." I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. Behind me, I heard Savannah giggle and Preston make a dismissive comment to our father. They were already moving on, their minds consumed by the millions of dollars they were about to spend. They thought they had won. They thought I had been permanently discarded, officially written out of the family legacy. I stepped out of the law office and into the dimly lit hallway, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs. I pulled the envelope back out of my purse and stared at the phone number. I did not know who was on the other end of that line, but I knew my grandfather. He did not leave me out of the will. He left me something else entirely, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. Before I could even unlock my phone screen to dial the digits, the heavy oak doors of Mr. Carmichael's office swung open behind me. The sudden burst of noise from inside spilled into the quiet, dimly lit corridor. I heard the unmistakable clinking of crystal glasses and Savannah's high-pitched laughter ringing out in pure elation. Then came the heavy, deliberate footsteps of my father. I turned around slowly, slipping the index card back into the pocket of my blazer. Charles stood there, his expensive imported loafers sinking into the plush hallway carpet. He looked immaculate in his charcoal suit, every inch the patriarch of a newly minted billionaire dynasty. For a brief, foolish fraction of a second, a tiny part of me thought he had come out to console me. I thought the father who used to read me bedtime stories might have briefly surfaced through the impenetrable corporate shell he had built around himself. But his jaw was set tight, and his eyes were cold, assessing me not as a daughter who had just been disinherited, but as a liability that needed to be managed. "Lydia," he said, his voice dropping into the exact same authoritative register he used to terminate mid-level employees at the firm. "I am glad I caught you before you reached the elevators. We have one final piece of administrative business to discuss." I kept my posture rigid, refusing to let my shoulders slump. "What is it, Dad?" He adjusted his silk tie, his gaze shifting to a point somewhere just past my left shoulder. "It is about the property on Elm Street, the townhouse." My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. The Elm Street townhouse was not a mansion, nor was it a luxury estate. It was a modest two-bedroom brick home built in the late 1970s, tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Grandpa Harrison had handed me the keys 5 years ago on the exact day I earned my certified fraud examiner credentials. He told me the property was an old company asset that had been sitting empty for a decade, and I could use it as my own to get on my feet. I had spent countless weekends covered in dust and paint, tearing up the worn-out carpets, refinishing the original hardwood floors, and turning that forgotten building into my absolute sanctuary. It was the only place in the entire world where I felt truly safe from my family's relentless, suffocating judgments. "What about the townhouse?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level, showing zero emotion. "Legally, the deed was never formally transferred to your personal name," Charles stated smoothly, reciting the facts like a pre-written legal brief. "It remained listed under the primary holding company portfolio. Now that Preston is the sole owner of Harrison Logistics and the primary estate assets have been distributed, the property falls under the new asset management plan." I stared at him, my mind quickly processing the legal jargon into plain reality. "You are evicting me." He winced slightly at the word, clearly preferring his sanitized corporate phrasing over the ugly, undeniable truth. "We are reallocating family assets to better suit our current lifestyle needs. Savannah has decided she wants to build a custom luxury pool house and a private spa facility. The Elm Street property sits directly adjacent to the western boundary of her new primary estate. It is the perfect location for the expansion she has been designing. She needs the lot cleared so the architects can begin their surveying." I felt a sharp, icy sting behind my eyes, but I ruthlessly suppressed the urge to cry. I looked at the man who had helped me learn to ride a bicycle, trying to reconcile him with the man who was now rendering me homeless so his favorite daughter could have an indoor swimming pool. Savannah wants to bulldoze my home for a pool house, I said, articulating every word so he was forced to hear exactly how grotesque the reality of his demand was. And you stepped out here to serve the eviction notice. Do not make this difficult, Lydia. My father sighed, rubbing his temples as if I were the one causing him a massive, unreasonable inconvenience. You have always had this stubborn, combative streak. You isolate yourself from our circles, you judge our lifestyle, and then you act completely surprised when you are no longer included in the family resources. Savannah has big plans for her social brand, and that expansion is crucial for her entertaining space. It is nothing personal. It is just real estate. Nothing personal. I repeated the words slowly in my mind, tasting their bitter irony. They were taking away the only home I had ever loved, erasing 5 years of my life and hard work with a bulldozer, and classifying it as a casual administrative real estate transaction. I need you to vacate the premises by the end of the week, Charles added, checking his heavy gold watch to signal that our conversation was concluding. The demolition crew is already booked for Monday morning. Preston signed off on the municipal permits an hour ago, before we even arrived here. By the end of the week, that gave me exactly 4 days to pack my entire life into cardboard boxes and find a new place to live in a highly competitive rental market. It was a calculated, deliberate cruelty designed to leave me scrambling, panicked, and desperate. They wanted to see me break. They wanted me to beg. They wanted me to cry and ask for a 30-day extension, or better yet, grovel for a lesser position at Preston's company just to survive. My investigator training kicked in a familiar cold survival mechanism, taking over my nervous system. When you are auditing a fraudulent company, you do not let the corrupt executives see you sweat. You do not show them your hand. You gather your evidence, you secure your perimeter, and you walk away until it is time to drop the hammer and watch their empire crumble. I looked my father straight in the eyes. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice or throw a theatrical tantrum like Savannah would have done if someone had dared to cross her. I simply offered a brief clinical nod. I will be out by Friday, I said cleanly. Charles looked momentarily thrown by my total lack of resistance. He blinked clearly, expecting a hysterical meltdown that he could later use as proof of my instability. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek monogrammed leather checkbook. Look, he muttered, a brief flash of something faintly resembling guilt crossing his features. I can write you a check for $5,000 right now, to help with the moving trucks and a security deposit on a new apartment somewhere further out of the city. We are not leaving you completely out in the cold. I looked at the leather checkbook, then back up at his face. The $5,000 was not an act of fatherly love. It was hush money. It was the absolute lowest price he was willing to pay to soothe his own conscience, to convince himself he was still a good provider father, while simultaneously rendering his daughter homeless. Keep your money, Charles, I said, deliberately dropping the title of dad for the very first time in my life. I am sure Savannah needs it for her imported pool tiles. His face hardened instantly, the momentary guilt vanishing behind a towering wall of arrogant indignation. Fine. Have it your way, Lydia. You always were too proud for your own good. Just make sure the property is completely empty and the keys are left on the kitchen counter by Friday afternoon. We do not want any delays with the demolition team. He turned his back on me and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the law office doors. As he pulled the door open, the sound of the celebration inside hit me like a physical wave. Pop. The sharp, distinctive crack of a champagne bottle being opened echoed down the hallway, ricocheting off the marble floors. I heard Preston cheering loudly, followed by my mother's delighted musical laughter. They were toasting to their newfound billions. They were celebrating the official legal erasure of the difficult middle child. Charles stepped back inside and let the heavy oak door swing shut, abruptly cutting off the noise and leaving me alone in the dim, silent corridor once more. I stood completely still for a full minute. My breathing was slow, measured, and entirely under my control. The humiliation burned fiercely in my chest, a hot, tight knot of anger and absolute betrayal, but I forced it down into a tiny, locked box inside my mind. I could not afford to fall apart. I had a severe deadline. I had a house to pack. And most importantly, I had a phone call to make. I reached into my pocket and touched the smooth edge of the index card. My grandfather had known them far better than I ever did. He had known their boundless greed, their unchecked ruthlessness, and their infinite capacity for cruelty. He knew they would try to strip me of everything right down to the roof over my head. That was exactly why he gave me the card instead of cash. I turned on my heel and walked toward the elevators. The soft ding of the arriving car sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. I stepped inside the mirrored cabin and watched the metallic doors slide shut, severing my final physical connection to the people who were supposed to be my family. By the time I reached the underground parking garage, the storm outside had intensified. I could hear thunder rumbling heavily in the distance, vibrating through the thick concrete pillars of the structure. I unlocked my reliable 5-year-old sedan and climbed into the driver's seat. The air inside the car was cold, smelling faintly of old coffee and vanilla air freshener. It was a far cry from Preston's fleet of luxury sports cars, but it was mine paid for entirely with money I had earned tracking down white-collar criminals. I put the keys in the ignition but did not start the engine. Instead, I pulled the index card out of my pocket and placed it on the steering wheel. The 10 digits stared back at me in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. They took my home. They took my family. They took my legacy. They believed they had completely defeated me. I picked up my cell phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. I was done being the silent victim of their toxic narrative. I was done absorbing their insults and walking away in the name of keeping the peace. My grandfather had given me a weapon, and as I sat in the freezing car, I realized I was finally ready to use it. I punched the 10 digits into my keypad with stiff fingers. The phone did not even complete its first full ring before the line clicked open. Donovan speaking. The voice was deep, resonant, and entirely unbothered by the late hour or the storm raging outside my car. I have been waiting for your call, Lydia. Harrison told me you would be the only one smart enough not to throw the number away. I gripped the steering wheel, my investigator instincts instantly locking into place. Who is this? How do you know my grandfather? I am the man your grandfather called when the lawyers and the accountants could not fix the problem, Donovan replied smoothly. My name is Arthur Donovan. I served as Harrison's covert crisis manager and private wealth executor for the better part of 2 decades. Mr. Carmichael, the gentleman who just handed your brother the keys to a sinking ship, handles the public estate. I handle the shadow estate, the real one. I furrowed my brow, the heater in my sedan finally kicking in, blowing warm air across my damp hands. A sinking ship, Preston just inherited a logistics empire worth hundreds of millions. Donovan let out a low, humorless chuckle. Preston inherited a heavily leveraged shell company. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Lydia. He was entirely aware of the rot festering inside his own house. He knew Preston has been quietly embezzling from the operational accounts for the past 4 years to cover catastrophic gambling losses. He knew your father and mother have been borrowing against their equity at exorbitant interest rates just to maintain their country club facade. And he knew your sister Savannah is currently drowning in secret debt to fund a lifestyle she absolutely cannot afford. I sat in stunned silence. My family had spent my entire life projecting an image of flawless financial superiority. They mocked my modest townhouse and my freelance career while they were secretly suffocating under the weight of their own arrogance. My grandfather had known. He had seen right through their tailored suits and designer dresses. So the millions they just inherited, I started my mind racing as I pieced the financial puzzle together. It is not real. Oh, the money is real, Donovan corrected. But it is a poisoned chalice. The cash Savannah received will barely cover the principal on her hidden loans once her creditors realize the estate is in transition. The warehouses Preston inherited are mortgaged to the hilt. But more importantly, Preston does not actually own the company anymore, not the parts that matter. I stared out the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking garage. Explain that to me. 3 years ago, when Harrison first discovered Preston's embezzlement, he came to me. Donovan said, his tone shifting into a sharp, businesslike cadence. He refused to let a legacy built on 50 years of sweat and blood be destroyed by an arrogant thief. But he also knew that confronting your parents would only result in endless denial and gaslighting. So he executed a silent, systematic asset stripping. Donovan paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet cabin of my car. He secretly moved the core intellectual property, the proprietary routing software algorithms, the operational patents, and the controlling voting shares of the holding company into an offshore shadow trust. We named it Apex Holdings. Preston currently owns the trucks and the buildings, but Apex Holdings owns the software those trucks need to operate. Apex Holdings owns the patents the entire supply chain relies upon. Apex Holdings is the primary secured creditor for every single loan your parents and sister currently hold. My breath caught in my throat. The magnitude of my grandfather's strategic brilliance was staggering. He had handed them an empty kingdom while quietly securing the actual power far out of their reach. "And who controls Apex Holdings?" I asked, though I already felt the answer vibrating in my bones. "You do," Lydia Donovan stated with absolute clarity. "That piece of paper was not just a phone number. It was your activation protocol. By making this call, you have formally initiated the succession plan. As of this exact second, you are the sole chief executive officer and primary beneficiary of Apex Holdings. You hold the patents, you control the voting shares, you own their debt. You are your family's biggest creditor." I leaned back against the headrest, the leather seat suddenly feeling like a throne. I was not the discarded, homeless middle child anymore. I was the absolute master of their financial universe. The townhouse eviction, the $5,000 hush money, the champagne toast celebrating my downfall. It was all a pathetic illusion. They were celebrating on the deck of the Titanic, and I was the one holding the keys to the only lifeboat. "Why me?" I whispered into the receiver, the vulnerability slipping out before I could catch it. "Why did he not just tell me?" "Because he needed you to stay hungry," Donovan replied softly. "He told me Lydia is a bloodhound. She is the only one in this gene pool with a moral compass and the grit to do what needs to be done. If I hand her $1 billion, she will be comfortable. If I hand her a puzzle and a reason to fight, she will be unstoppable. He needed you to experience their absolute worst so you would not hesitate when it came time to pull the trigger." A hot tear slipped down my cheek, but it was not a tear of grief. It was fierce, undeniable vindication. My grandfather had seen me. He had watched me work 2 jobs, study late into the night, and build my fraud investigation career from scratch. He had recognized my strength even when the rest of the world ignored me. He had weaponized my exclusion, turning my status as the family outcast into my greatest strategic advantage. "Are you somewhere secure?" Donovan asked, his voice returning to a crisp professional clip. "I am in my car in the parking garage beneath Mr. Carmichael's office," I replied, wiping my cheek and sitting up straight. "Good," Donovan said. "I have already dispatched a security detail and a private transport to your location. They will escort you to the Apex Holdings primary operational suite. We have a lot of ground to cover, Madam CEO, and very little time." I looked at the dashboard clock. My father had given me until Friday to pack up my entire life and vacate the Elm Street townhouse. He had told me not to make things difficult. He had treated my home like a casual, administrative casualty. "Donovan," I said, my voice hardening into a blade of pure steel. "They are evicting me from the Elm Street townhouse. Charles told me Preston signed off on the demolition permits this morning. Savannah wants to bulldoze my house to build a luxury pool house." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on Donovan's end of the line. A brief, sharp silence followed. The Elm Street property was deeded to the primary holding company, Donovan confirmed, which means it transferred to Preston under the decoy will. Legally, he does hold the right to issue an eviction notice. I gripped the steering wheel. I need to know exactly how much power I have right now. Can I stop the demolition? Donovan chuckled, a dark, dangerous sound that sent a thrill of pure adrenaline straight down my spine. "You do not just have the power to stop a demolition, Lydia. You have the power to dismantle their entire reality. But we must play this precisely. Your grandfather trained you to investigate financial crimes. Now we are going to let them commit a few more on the record before we drop the net. I nodded, even though he could not see me. What is our first move? First, you pack your essential files from the townhouse, Donovan instructed. Let them think they have won the real estate battle. Let Savannah gloat. We need them arrogant, blind, and completely comfortable in their false superiority. While they are busy picking out pool tiles, we will begin tightening the financial noose. I looked at the rearview mirror, meeting my own gaze. The woman staring back at me was no longer the quiet, accommodating sister who absorbed insults to keep the peace. She was the architect of their impending ruin. I am ready, Donovan, I said. Excellent, he replied. Head up to the street level. A black SUV is waiting for you at the south exit. Leave your car in the garage for now. We will have it retrieved later. It is time for you to see your new empire, Lydia. I ended the call, the screen going dark. I carefully picked up the index card and slid it securely behind my phone case. I grabbed my purse, stepped out of the freezing sedan, and locked the doors. The echo of the locks engaging sounded remarkably like a vault sealing shut. I walked toward the parking garage exit, the heavy, humid air of the storm washing over me as I approached the street level. True to Donovan's word, a sleek, armored black SUV sat idling at the curb. The rear passenger door swung open as I approached, revealing a spacious, leather-lined interior that smelled of fresh rain and expensive upholstery. I climbed inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The sudden silence within the armored cabin was profound, instantly cutting off the noise of the city traffic and the torrential rain. A privacy partition separated me from the driver, and a glowing digital tablet sat waiting on the center console. The screen displayed a single encrypted file folder labeled Apex Holdings Primary Ledgers. I reached out and touched the screen. The file opened instantly, displaying a dizzying array of offshore accounts, patent registries, and controlling stock certificates. My eyes scanned the staggering numbers, the undeniable proof of my grandfather's hidden legacy. He had built a fortress, impenetrable and absolute, and he had handed me the sole key. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out to see a text message from Savannah. It was a photo of a marble tile sample accompanied by a caption that dripped with malicious glee. Found the perfect imported stone for the new pool house. So glad the space will finally be put to good use instead of gathering dust. Make sure you are out by Friday. I am not paying for your moving boxes. I stared at the text message, a slow, predatory smile curving my lips. I did not type a response. I did not need to. Savannah was celebrating her stolen victory, completely unaware that she was dancing on a trapdoor, and my hand was resting firmly on the lever. I placed my phone face down on the leather seat and turned my full attention back to the digital tablet. I had ledgers to review, patents to secure, and a corporate trap to meticulously construct. My family had spent 33 years underestimating my intelligence, mocking my dedication, and discarding my worth. They had treated me like a useless liability. They were about to find out just how lethal a liability could be. I spent my first night as a billionaire not popping champagne, but sitting in a sterile, secure boardroom high above the city, reviewing decades of financial ledgers. Donovan and his team walked me through every hidden asset, every encrypted file, and every fatal mistake my brother and sister had made over the last 4 years. By the time the sun began to rise over the skyline, casting a pale golden glow through the bulletproof glass of the Apex Holdings suite, the architecture of my trap was fully designed. I needed a few hours of sleep and a change of clothes before I began executing the next phase. Donovan offered to send a specialized team to pack my personal belongings, but I declined. There were private case files, encrypted hard drives, and physical backups hidden in the floorboards of my townhouse that I needed to retrieve myself. I arrived at Elm Street just after 8 in the morning. The heavy rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving the suburban street bright and deceptively peaceful. But as my armored SUV pulled around the corner, my driver, a stoic ex-military man named Vance, slowed the vehicle to an abrupt halt. A massive, obnoxious pink moving truck was parked illegally across my driveway, its ramp fully extended over my flower beds. 3 men in heavy work boots were dragging my furniture out of the front door and dumping it carelessly onto the wet grass. Standing in the center of my front yard, holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee and pointing her phone camera at the chaos, was my sister Savannah. It was Wednesday morning. Charles had explicitly given me until Friday afternoon to vacate. But patience had never been Savannah's strong suit, especially not when she had an opportunity to inflict cruelty on a captive audience. I stepped out of the SUV. Vance moved to follow me, but I held up a hand silently, instructing him to stay back. I walked up the driveway, my heels clicking sharply against the damp concrete. Savannah did not even flinch when she saw me. Instead, she smiled a wide, predatory grin and angled her phone to capture my arrival perfectly in the frame. "Look who finally decided to show up," she announced to her camera, ensuring her voice projected clearly for whatever live stream she was broadcasting to her hundreds of thousands of followers. "I told you guys my sister is completely irresponsible. We are doing a massive renovation kickoff today, and she left all her junk for me to clean up." I looked past her to the lawn. My carefully curated library of textbooks and reference manuals had been dumped unceremoniously into heavy black trash bags. Several of the bags had ripped open, spilling pages onto the muddy soil. My vintage armchair, a piece I had painstakingly restored myself, sat upside down, near the curb, one of its wooden legs splintered from being dropped off the truck ramp. "You are early, Savannah," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any reaction she could use for her broadcast. "Charles gave me until Friday." Savannah rolled her eyes dramatically and took a sip of her coffee. "Dad is way too soft on you. The architects are charging me by the hour, and I am not delaying my luxury pool house project just because you are too lazy to pack. Besides, I am doing you a massive favor. I bought you these premium garbage bags. They are absolutely perfect for your aesthetic." She turned her phone back to her face, pouting her lips flawlessly for the screen tapping the glass to acknowledge a comment from one of her viewers. "You guys, it is so exhausting dealing with family members who just refuse to elevate their lives. I mean, look at this boring, poor lifestyle. Who even lives like this? It is like a museum of mediocrity. We are going to bulldoze this entire depressing lot and build a state-of-the-art wellness spa. It is going to be iconic." A younger, more fragile version of myself might have screamed. I might have tried to snatch the phone out of her manicured hand, or physically fought the movers who were currently hauling my mattress down the front stairs. But the woman standing on that lawn was the CEO of Apex Holdings. I was looking at a sister who was secretly financially ruined, drowning in high-interest debt, and entirely dependent on a shadow company I now exclusively controlled. Her mockery was not hurtful. It was genuinely pathetic. It was the desperate, hollow performance of a woman dancing blindly on the edge of a sheer cliff. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. I did not record her face. I recorded the license plate of the moving truck. I recorded the company logo on the side of the cab. I recorded the faces of the unauthorized men inside my home. I took clear, high-resolution photographs of the damaged furniture and the torn trash bags on the wet lawn. Every single image was automatically time-stamped and geolocated. Documentation was the unshakable foundation of every successful fraud and trespassing case I had ever built. Savannah was handing me a perfectly packaged lawsuit for illegal eviction, trespassing, and destruction of property, wrapped neatly in a bow of public digital evidence. Fraudsters always document their own crimes out of sheer arrogance. "Are you seriously taking pictures of trash?" Savannah laughed, her voice shrill and grating over the morning breeze. "What are you going to make a scrapbook of your failures to show your non-existent friends?" I ignored her completely. I walked straight past her, my shoulder brushing past hers, and entered the townhouse. The movers stopped dead in their tracks, looking uncertainly at me as I stepped into the foyer. "Take whatever furniture you want," I told them, my voice cutting through the dusty air with absolute freezing authority. "But if a single one of you touches the floorboards in the master bedroom closet, I will personally ensure you spend the next 5 years dealing with federal trespassing and corporate espionage charges." The men immediately backed away, raising their hands in silent surrender. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, bypassing the chaos of overturned drawers and scattered clothes. I knelt in the back of my closet, pried up the loose floorboard I had installed years ago, and retrieved a heavy fireproof lockbox. Inside were my encrypted hard drives, my passport, and the physical backups of my most sensitive investigation files. It was the only thing in this entire house that truly mattered. Everything else was just wood and fabric. I walked back downstairs, the heavy lockbox secured firmly in my grip. Savannah was waiting by the front door, looking visibly annoyed that I had not given her the dramatic weeping reaction she desperately craved for her online audience. "You are just going to leave?" she scoffed, lowering her phone slightly, her disappointment evident. "No crying. No begging. Dad for a second chance." "You are so boring, Lydia. You have literally nothing. You are walking away with a metal box and garbage bags." I stopped at the threshold and looked at her. I took in her designer clothes, her expensive jewelry, and the ignorant sneer on her face. I knew the exact negative balance of her hidden credit lines. I knew she was exactly 3 weeks away from defaulting on her primary mansion mortgage. "You are right, Savannah," I said calmly, offering her a tight, polite smile. "I have nothing to tie me down here anymore. Enjoy the renovation. Make sure you pick out some really expensive imported tiles for that pool. I hear Italian marble is beautiful this time of year." She smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder, completely missing the lethal undertone vibrating in my voice. "Oh, I absolutely will. Have fun in whatever cheap tiny apartment you end up in." I walked down the driveway and climbed back into the waiting armored SUV. Vance closed the heavy door behind me, instantly shutting out the sound of Savannah's mocking laughter and the grinding engine of the moving truck. "Take us to the safe house, Vance," I instructed, placing the lockbox carefully on the leather seat beside me. He nodded, putting the massive vehicle into gear and pulling smoothly away from the curb. I did not look back at the townhouse. It was just bricks and drywall. My real home was the empire I was about to systematically dismantle and rebuild. We drove into the heart of the city, bypassing the commercial district and entering one of the most exclusive high-security residential high-rises in the downtown financial sector. Donovan had arranged for a luxury penthouse suite that served as a corporate safe house for top-tier Apex Holdings executives. The private elevator opened directly into a sprawling glass-walled apartment overlooking the entire city skyline. It was impeccably furnished in sharp modern lines, equipped with military-grade cybersecurity protocols, secure fiber optic network lines, and a massive digital workstation that spanned an entire wall. This was not just a place to sleep or hide, this was a war room. I set my lockbox on the massive marble kitchen island and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Far in the distance, past the glittering skyscrapers, I could see the massive logistics hubs, the sprawling warehouses that Preston mistakenly believed he owned and controlled. I could see the high-rent districts where my parents were currently hemorrhaging borrowed money just to maintain their precarious social standing. They thought they had successfully discarded me. They thought they had left me with a torn trash bag on a wet lawn. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure Apex network. The digital dashboard lit up instantly, displaying the real-time financial data of my family's crumbling kingdom. The eviction was complete. The personal emotional ties were officially and permanently severed. There was no more guilt holding me back, no more lingering familial loyalty to soften the blow. Savannah's cruel performative ambush had been the final necessary catalyst. She wanted to broadcast her victory to the world. She wanted an audience to watch her tear me down. I tapped my fingers against the cool marble countertop, a cold, calculated strategy solidifying in my mind with absolute clarity. I was going to give her an audience. I was going to give all of them an audience. I opened the operational ledger for Preston's logistics company, watching his illegal pending wire transfers flash in bright red warnings on the screen. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the countdown had officially begun. The digital dashboard of Apex Holdings pulsed with a soft crimson glow, reflecting against the bulletproof glass of my safe house window. I sat perfectly still watching the transaction logs. Preston had just attempted his wire transfer for the fourth time in 2 hours. The sum was staggering. $4 million destined for an obfuscated offshore account known to be a front for a high-stakes gambling syndicate. Each time he pressed submit on his end, the Apex security protocols triggered an automatic denial. Insufficient authorization. I could almost picture him in our grandfather's old office, sweating through his custom suit, pounding his fist against the mahogany desk. He probably thought it was a banking glitch at first, a routine security hold on a newly inherited estate. But by the fourth denial, panic would be setting in. The syndicate did not care about probate courts or transition periods. They wanted their money, and Preston was completely out of time. Unable to access the cash and desperate for a scapegoat, his rage needed a target. He could not yell at the bank without raising suspicion. He could not tell our parents because he had spent the last 4 years convincing them he was a financial genius. So he turned his crosshairs on the only person he had always been allowed to destroy without consequence. Me. It started at exactly 10 in the morning. I had just finished brewing a cup of black coffee in the penthouse kitchen when my secure work phone lit up. The caller ID displayed the name of Marcus Vance. He was the chief risk officer for Vanguard Financial, and he was my biggest freelance client. I had spent the last 8 months tirelessly securing a massive contract to audit their internal compliance protocols. It was a career-defining project, the kind of contract that would elevate my independent agency from a successful boutique operation into a major industry player. I answered the call with my standard professional greeting, expecting to discuss the timeline for our first quarterly review. Instead, I was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. "Lydia, we have a situation," Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual warmth. It was clipped, distant, and defensive. "I am going to have to terminate our consulting agreement effective immediately. The legal department is drafting the cancellation paperwork as we speak. You will be compensated for the hours billed to date, but your access to our servers has already been revoked." I placed my coffee mug on the counter, my investigative instincts instantly flaring. This was not a routine cancellation. Companies do not terminate an 8-month procurement process on a Wednesday morning without a catastrophic catalyst. Marcus Y said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I respect your position, but I require an explanation. If there has been a breach in protocol or a conflict of interest, I need to be informed so I can address it." He sighed, a sharp exhalation of breath that sounded remarkably like pity. "You know the Harrison name carries a lot of weight in this city, Lydia. Your brother Preston reached out to our board of directors directly an hour ago. He felt it was his fiduciary and moral duty to warn us about your current status." I closed my eyes, absorbing the impact of the words. "Preston? Of course. What exactly did my brother say, Marcus?" There was a pause. "He informed the board that you have been formally disinherited by your late grandfather. He claimed the family caught you attempting to systematically steal from the estate during his final days. Preston stated that they are keeping the matter out of criminal court, out of respect for your grandfather's memory, but he strongly advised us that placing sensitive financial data in your hands would be a severe liability." He used the words unstable and compromised. A hot wave of revulsion washed over me, but I forced it down, locking it away in the same mental vault where I kept every other family betrayal. Preston was not just lashing out. He was trying to dismantle my ability to survive. Knowing I had been evicted and assuming I was currently scrambling for money, he wanted to ensure my primary sources of income vanished. He was trying to starve me out, so I would have to come crawling back to the family begging for a handout. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, chilling clarity. "You and I have worked together for 2 years. You have seen my audits. You know my methodology. Do I strike you as an unstable operative who steals from dying relatives?" "Listen to me, Lydia," he replied, his tone softening just a fraction. "On a personal level, I do not believe a word of it. You are the sharpest investigator I have ever hired. But I am a risk officer. When the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire calls my board and flags a contractor for embezzlement, I cannot ignore it. The optics alone are radioactive. My hands are tied. I am truly sorry." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the dark screen. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Before I could even process the loss of Vanguard Financial, my phone rang again. Then a third time. Over the next 45 minutes, the dominoes fell with brutal efficiency. My second largest client, a private wealth management firm, called to suspend my ongoing contract, citing concerning information received from the Harrison family office. My third client, a tech startup I had been advising on fraud prevention, emailed a formal termination notice. Preston was working his way down my entire client roster, utilizing the massive social and corporate leverage my grandfather had built. He was wielding the Harrison name like a club, smashing the professional reputation I had spent my entire adult life painstakingly constructing. He was telling the most influential executives in the city that I was a thief, a liar, and a toxic liability. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the sprawling city. I could feel the familiar, insidious creeping of self-doubt trying to take root in my mind. It was the same feeling I had whenever my mother compared me to Savannah or my father dismissed my achievements. The crushing weight of their collective disapproval designed to make me feel small, powerless, and utterly alone. For 5 years, I had told myself that as long as I worked hard enough and built my own independent success, they could not touch me. But I had been wrong. They could reach into my life at any moment and tear it apart just because they were angry. Preston was drowning in his own criminal failures, and his immediate instinct was to hold my head under the water. My phone chimed with a text message. I walked over and picked it up. It was from an unknown number, but I recognized the arrogant cadence of the words instantly. Actions have consequences, Lydia. Should have taken the $5,000 from Dad and kept your mouth shut. Nobody hires a thief. Good luck paying rent. I stared at Preston's text message. He was so proud of himself. He thought he had delivered a fatal blow. He thought he had effectively ruined my life by weaponizing my grandfather's death and twisting the truth to fit his malicious narrative. He was expecting me to call him sobbing. He was expecting me to beg for mercy, to apologize for whatever perceived slight had triggered his rage. Instead of crying, I felt a slow, burning smile spread across my face. Preston was a fool. He had just made the single biggest mistake a cornered criminal could possibly make. He had escalated the conflict while completely blind to the actual battlefield. I walked over to the massive digital workstation and tapped the encrypted tablet, waking up the Apex Holdings dashboard. I brought up Preston's personal banking details, the ones tied to the corporate accounts he was desperately trying to bleed dry. He wanted to play games with reputations. He wanted to weaponize the concept of theft. He wanted to show me what it felt like to lose everything in the blink of an eye. I picked up my secure communications line and dialed my crisis manager. Donovan answered immediately. Lydia, I assume you are settling in. Preston just torched my freelance business, I said, my voice devoid of panic, radiating pure cold strategy. He called my top 3 clients and told them I was disinherited for stealing from the estate. He is trying to cut off my cash flow to punish me for the blocked wire transfers. A heavy silence hung on the line. Then Donovan let out a sharp, appreciative breath. Your brother is remarkably unintelligent. Do you need me to deploy the legal team to issue cease and desist orders? We can have defamation suits filed in federal court by noon. No, I said firmly. Let him talk. Let him dig his grave as deep as he possibly can. The more he lies about me stealing, the more poetic it will be when we reveal exactly where the missing $4 million actually went. I leaned over the digital console, my eyes scanning the flashing red alerts of Preston's denied transactions. Donovan, Rush said, tracing my finger over the screen. I want to accelerate the timeline. Preston is desperate for liquid cash right now, and desperation breeds mistakes. I want to force his hand. What are your orders, Madam CEO? Donovan asked, his tone shifting into absolute compliance. Freeze his personal corporate credit lines, I instructed. All of them. Flag them for suspicious activity under the Apex Holdings Master Authority. When he tries to pay for his expensive lunches or his custom suits, I want his cards declined. He wants to know what it feels like to be cut off from the family resources. Let us give him an authentic experience. Consider it done, Donovan replied. He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee using the company dime by the end of the hour. What else? I turned away from the screen, looking out at the storm clouds gathering over the city skyline. He is going to run to our parents when the cards stop working, I said, anticipating the exact psychological maneuvers of my toxic family. He will spin a story about banking errors and victimhood. I need to look them in the eye and see exactly how far they are willing to go to defend him. I am going to pay Catherine and Charles a visit. Donovan paused. Are you certain that is wise, Lydia? They have already proven they are willing to render you homeless. Confronting them directly could be highly volatile. I know exactly who they are, Donovan, I said, my voice hardening. But I need them to go on the record. I need them to explicitly choose their side before I burn their kingdom to the ground. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the marble counter. Preston had wanted to break me. Instead, he had just handed me the match. I walked over to the safe house closet and pulled out a sharp tailored blazer. It was time to go see my parents. The drive to my parents' sprawling estate in the exclusive northern suburbs took less than 40 minutes, but it felt like traveling to an entirely different reality. The heavy storm had passed, leaving the manicured lawns and towering oak trees of their neighborhood glistening with a damp, pristine sheen. I pulled my sedan up to the massive wrought iron gates of the property. The security guard, a man who had known me since I was a teenager, looked surprised to see me, but buzzed me through without asking questions. As I drove up the winding half-mile-long driveway, I observed the grand limestone facade of the mansion. It was a monument to excess. Everything about the property was designed to project absolute, unshakable wealth. But armed with Donovan's ledgers, I now looked at the imposing columns and slate roof and saw nothing but a massive, suffocating pile of high-interest debt. I parked near the extravagant fountain in the circular driveway and stepped out. I did not bother knocking. The heavy mahogany front door was unlocked, as it usually was during the day when the housekeeping staff was bustling about. I walked into the grand foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the imported Italian marble. The house smelled exactly as it always had, a suffocating blend of expensive floral arrangements and lemon-scented floor wax. I moved past the sweeping double staircase and headed directly toward the back of the house. I knew exactly where to find them. At this hour on a Wednesday, my parents would be taking their morning tea in the glass-enclosed sunroom overlooking the manicured rose gardens. As I approached the sunroom, I paused just outside the doorway. Catherine and Charles were sitting at a glass patio table. My mother was dressed in crisp, white linen, casually flipping through a stack of glossy magazines and fabric swatches. My father sat opposite her, holding his phone tightly to his ear. His face was flushed and his posture was rigid with tension. "I do not care what the banking representative says," Charles hissed into the phone, keeping his voice low but laced with panic. "It is a corporate platinum card. There are no spending limits. Run it again. Tell them to authorize the transaction manually. I am not having my card declined at the club. Fix it immediately." He slammed the phone down onto the glass table, rubbing his temples furiously. I felt a cool, sharp thrill of satisfaction. Donovan had executed my orders perfectly. Preston's corporate cards were frozen, and the financial contagion was already spreading to my parents' auxiliary accounts. The walls were rapidly closing in on them, and they had absolutely no idea who was tightening the vice. I stepped fully into the sunroom. The sudden movement caught their attention and both of their heads snapped toward me. The panic on my father's face vanished instantly, replaced by a hardened mask of arrogant irritation. My mother dropped her fabric swatches, her eyes narrowing as she took in my presence. She looked at my tailored suit, clearly surprised that I was not wearing the wrinkled, desperate clothes of a woman who had just been evicted and professionally ruined. "Lydia," my mother said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What on earth are you doing here? You know you are not supposed to drop by unannounced. And frankly, after your behavior at the lawyer's office yesterday, you are incredibly bold to show your face in this house." "I did not come here to socialize, Catherine," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I walked toward the table, stopping just a few feet away, towering over them as they sat. "I came here to discuss Preston," Charles scoffed, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "If you are here to beg for an extension on the townhouse eviction, you are wasting your time. The demolition crew is confirmed. You brought that entirely upon yourself." "I am not here about the townhouse," I replied cleanly. I am here because an hour ago Preston called the risk management officers at my top 3 independent clients. He used the Harrison Logistics name to inform them that I was disinherited for attempting to steal from Grandpa Harrison on his deathbed. He told my clients I am a thief and an unstable liability. As a direct result, I have lost my major consulting contracts. I watched their faces carefully. As a fraud investigator, I read micro-expressions for a living. I was looking for a flicker of shock, a moment of parental horror, that their son would commit such a vicious career-destroying act against their daughter. I wanted to see if there was a single ounce of genuine family loyalty buried beneath their greed. There was nothing. Not a single trace of surprise or dismay. Instead, my mother let out a long theatrical sigh and picked up her teacup, taking a delicate sip, before looking back at me with absolute disdain. "Well, what did you expect?" Lydia Catherine asked smoothly, setting the cup down on its porcelain saucer. "If you were just a team player and apologized to your brother, he wouldn't have to warn people about you. You bring this toxic energy on yourself." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. She was not just excusing Preston's malicious slander, she was actively blaming me for being the victim of it. "Warn people about me," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "He lied to federal compliance officers. He fabricated a story about me stealing from a dying man to intentionally destroy my livelihood. And you are telling me it is my fault for not being a team player. You have always been so dramatic." Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "Preston is the head of the family now. He has a responsibility to protect the Harrison name. When you storm out of legal proceedings, refuse to show respect for the family hierarchy, and refuse to accept the consequences of your own isolation, you become a liability. Preston is simply doing what is necessary to ensure our corporate partners know we do not endorse your combative behavior. If you had just accepted your place and supported his transition to CEO, none of this would be happening. You pushed him to do this, Lydia." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. The gaslighting was so seamless, so deeply ingrained in her psychology, that she genuinely believed her own twisted narrative. In her mind, Preston destroying my career was a righteous act of family preservation, and my anger was simply evidence of my toxic nature. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the glass table. He looked at me not with anger, but with profound, suffocating pity. It was the same look he used when firing junior executives who had failed to meet his impossible standards. "Your mother is right," Charles stated, his voice adopting a patronizing, lecturing tone. "You have spent your entire adult life running away from this family, playing detective with your little freelance agency, pretending you are somehow morally superior to the business that put a roof over your head. And where has it gotten you? You are 33 years old. You are about to be homeless, and your clients drop you the second a real executive makes a phone call." He picked up his phone, tapping the dark screen thoughtfully. "You should be begging Preston for a low-level job instead of standing in my sunroom throwing accusations. If you showed an ounce of humility, he might find a place for you in the mailroom or the accounting department. A quiet, stable position where you could actually contribute to the family instead of constantly fighting us. But you refuse to bend. You refuse to acknowledge that your brother won." I felt a cold, hard knot of absolute clarity solidify in the center of my chest. I had come here to give them one last opportunity to act like parents. I had given them the chance to condemn Preston's illegal and cruel retaliation. Instead, they had eagerly rushed to his defense, justifying his abuse and demanding my submission. They wanted me broken. They wanted me working a menial desk job under the brother who despised me, completely dependent on the family wealth they mistakenly believed they controlled. "You want me to beg him for a job," I repeated, ensuring I understood the exact parameters of their delusion. "You want me to apologize to the man who is slandering my name to federal compliance officers, and you want me to work in his accounting department." "It is the only logical path forward for you," Charles said flatly. "Your freelance business is clearly finished. The Elm Street property will be bulldozed on Monday. You have no assets, Lydia. You have no leverage. The sooner you accept that reality, the sooner you can start rebuilding your life under the protection of this family." But it starts with you calling your brother, offering a full unconditional apology, and asking how you can serve Harrison Logistics. I looked at Charles. I looked at Catherine. I committed every detail of their smug, arrogant faces to memory. I wanted to remember exactly how they looked in this moment of supreme, unjustified confidence. I wanted to remember the exact pitch of my mother's voice when she told me I brought this toxicity on myself. You are right about one thing, Charles, I said, keeping my posture relaxed and my expression entirely unreadable. I have been playing detective for a very long time. I have spent years learning exactly how corporate fraud operates. I know how executives hide their gambling debts. I know how shell companies are used to leverage real estate that is already drowning in multiple mortgages. I know exactly what it looks like when a family empire is rotting from the inside out. Charles frowned, a brief flash of genuine confusion crossing his features. What are you talking about? I am talking about actions and consequences, I said, echoing my mother's earlier words back to her. I came here today to see if there was any line Preston could cross that you would not defend. I came to see if you were just blind to his cruelty, or if you were actively cheering for it. You have given me my answer. You have made your positions crystal clear, Catherine scoffed, picking up a glossy magazine. Are you finished with this dramatic monologue, Lydia? We have a charity gala to plan, and I do not have the patience for your tantrums today. I took a step back toward the hallway. I am completely finished, Catherine. I will not be begging Preston for a job, and I will not be calling him to apologize. Charles let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. Then do not expect us to answer your calls when you cannot afford rent next week. You are entirely on your own. On. I offered them a sharp, devastating smile. They had no idea that their credit cards were declining because I had frozen them. They had no idea that Preston's wire transfers were failing because I was denying them. They thought I was a powerless victim standing in their sunroom, when in reality, I was the executioner standing over their guillotine. Enjoy your gala, I said softly. I am sure it will be an unforgettable evening. I turned and walked out of the sunroom, leaving them sitting in their glass cage of false security. As I marched back through the marble foyer and out the heavy mahogany front doors, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Donovan. Preston has escalated. He is attempting to secure a massive bridge loan using the operational warehouses as collateral, awaiting your authorization to intercept. I unlocked my car and climbed into the driver's seat. The final shred of familial hesitation had been burned away in that sunroom. My parents had chosen their side. They had demanded my absolute destruction. I typed my response to Donovan with flying fingers. Intercept the loan. Deny all collateral transfers. Let them bleed. I started the engine, pulling away from the sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate. The war was no longer a silent defensive maneuver. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to tighten the financial noose and watch them slowly realize that the daughter they had discarded was the only one holding the rope. I navigated the slick city streets, the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers mirroring the steady, calculated beating of my heart. Returning to the Apex Holdings safe house felt like stepping onto the bridge of a battleship. Donovan was already waiting by the primary digital console when I walked through the glass doors. He handed me a fresh cup of coffee, his eyes gleaming with the sharp, predatory satisfaction of a master tactician watching a flawlessly executed maneuver. The bridge loan has been intercepted and officially denied. Donovan reported, bringing up a complex web of financial routing numbers on the main screen. Preston attempted to leverage 3 of the primary operational warehouses to secure a quick $7 million from a predatory commercial lender. He was so desperate, he agreed to a devastating interest rate. However, the moment the lender ran the title search, our automated system flagged the properties. The lender was immediately notified that Apex Holdings holds the primary unassailable lien on every square inch of commercial real estate associated with Harrison Logistics. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter dark roast ground me. How did Preston react? I asked. Like a man watching his parachute catch fire? Donovan replied, tapping a few keys to display an intercepted communication log. He immediately contacted Mr. Carmichael, demanding to know why a company called Apex Holdings was blocking his executive actions. Mr. Carmichael had to explain in very uncomfortable legal terms that while Preston inherited the physical assets, your grandfather had heavily leveraged those assets against a private shadow trust years ago. Mr. Carmichael, of course, has no idea that you are the sole beneficiary of that trust. He only knows that Apex Holdings holds the master keys, and until the outstanding primary debts are cleared, Preston cannot liquidate leverage or sell a single cardboard box. Savannah was experiencing her own spectacular financial collision. I brought up the monitoring feed for the residential properties. Savannah had inherited $15 million in liquid assets on paper, but the reality of probate and offshore rooting meant that cash was tied up in a mandatory 90-day transition hold. Savannah did not have 90 days. She had already hired premium architects, signed contracts with luxury pool contractors, and completely maxed out her hidden personal credit lines to maintain the illusion of infinite wealth for her social media followers. When she realized the $15 million was temporarily frozen, she attempted a classic reckless maneuver. She tried to take out a massive line of credit using the Manhattan penthouse as collateral. She submitted the application an hour ago, Donovan said, highlighting a flashing alert on the left side of the screen. She assumed the penthouse was a free and clear asset. She had no idea your grandfather transferred the primary deed of the Manhattan property to Apex Holdings 3 years ago when he first realized her spending was spiraling out of control. Savannah only owns the right to reside there, not the right to leverage it. Block the application, I ordered, setting my coffee mug down. Issue a formal notification to her broker stating that the property is currently under asset review by the primary lien holder. Deny all requests for equity withdrawal. I watched the screen as Donovan executed the command. It took less than 3 minutes for the rejection to process. Savannah's financial lifeline was instantly severed. She was entirely cut off, legally barred from accessing the wealth she had gloated about just 24 hours earlier. Her contractors would be demanding their initial deposits by Friday. Her credit cards were already declining. The golden child was officially bankrupt, and she did not even possess the basic financial literacy to understand how it had happened. The freeze was absolute. Over the next 48 hours, the Apex Holdings dashboard painted a vivid picture of a family in total, unprecedented freefall. Preston was frantically moving money between empty shell accounts, trying to create the illusion of liquidity to stave off his gambling syndicate creditors. Catherine and Charles were experiencing the terrifying reality of frozen platinum cards at their exclusive country clubs and luxury boutiques. Every time any of them attempted to access the Harrison fortune, they slammed face first into a solid brick wall named Apex Holdings. They were completely surrounded, suffocating in a vacuum of their own making, and the oxygen was rapidly running out. I was sitting at the Marble Kitchen Island on Friday morning, reviewing the finalized blueprints for the corporate takeover, when my personal cell phone began to vibrate. The caller ID displayed my father's name. It was the exact day he had mandated I vacate the Elm Street townhouse. He had told me not to expect them to answer my calls when I could not afford rent. Yet here he was dialing my number. I let it ring 3 times, allowing the tension to stretch before I finally swiped the screen and answered. "Hello, Charles," I said, keeping my voice mild, pleasant, and entirely stripped of any familial warmth. "Lydia," he began. His voice lacked the booming, arrogant authority he had wielded in the sunroom. It sounded thin, strained, and heavily layered with a forced, unnatural camaraderie. "I am glad I caught you. I know things got a bit heated the other day, but family is family, and we need to stick together during transition periods." Transition periods. I repeated the phrase, enjoying the sheer absurdity of his corporate spin. Is that what we are calling it now? Because last time we spoke, you told me I was entirely on my own and demanded my house keys by this afternoon. Charles cleared his throat, a nervous grating sound. Yes, well, emotions were running high regarding the estate. Your brother and sister are under a tremendous amount of pressure right now, managing your grandfather's legacy. There have been some unexpected bureaucratic hurdles. The probate courts are dragging their feet, and the estate lawyers are dealing with some incredibly frustrating red tape regarding a holding company that had prior claims on the assets. That sounds like a terrible inconvenience for the new billionaires, I replied cleanly. But I fail to see how Preston's paperwork issues involve me. We are experiencing a temporary gap in liquid capital. Charles said the words rushing out of his mouth as if he wanted to get them over with as quickly as possible. It is a minor cash flow issue, nothing serious. The estate will clear in a few weeks, and the millions will be fully accessible. But in the meantime, we have some immediate obligations that cannot be delayed. Savannah has contractors threatening to walk off the job, and Preston has some sensitive vendor accounts that require immediate settlement. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the marble counter. You are calling to tell me that the great Harrison family is currently broke. We are not broke, Lydia. Charles snapped, a brief flash of his usual temper breaking through the facade. We are simply illiquid at this exact moment. It happens in major corporate transitions. I am calling because we need to pool our resources. I know you have been hoarding cash from your freelance investigations for years. You have always been terribly frugal. Frugal, I said. Because you refused to pay for my education or help me when I started my business. Do not make this about the past. He interrupted, his tone shifting into a desperate, demanding cadence. I am your father, and I am asking you to step up for your family. I need you to take out a personal loan for $100,000. Wire the funds to my personal account by the end of the day. It will bridge this temporary gap. We will pay you back with a 20% premium the second Savannah's liquid assets are released from probate. It is a guaranteed return on investment. I stared at the phone, genuinely marveling at the boundless toxic audacity of the man on the other end of the line. Less than 48 hours ago, he had looked me in the eye and told me to beg his embezzling son for a job in the mailroom. He had threatened me with homelessness. He had stood by while my mother blamed me for my brother's malicious professional sabotage. And now, blinded by desperation, he was demanding I leverage my own hard-earned credit to save them from the consequences of their financial incompetence. He did not know he was speaking to the CEO of Apex Holdings. He thought he was speaking to the discarded, obedient daughter who would eagerly empty her bank account just to buy a fleeting moment of his approval. You want me to take out a $100,000 personal loan to pay for Savannah's pool house contractors and Preston's hidden debts? I stated, making sure the reality of his request was articulated with absolute, undeniable clarity. It is a bridge loan, Lydia, he insisted, his breathing shallow and rapid. We will pay you back. I give you my word as your father. We just need the cash today to keep the vendors quiet until the estate lawyers clear the Apex Holdings block on the accounts. I let a long, heavy silence stretch across the line. I looked up at the digital dashboard where Apex Holdings was currently systematically dismantling his entire life. I thought about the index card in my pocket. I thought about my grandfather, who had known exactly how this moment would play out. No, Charles. I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute, unbreakable stone. I am not giving you a single dime. Lydia, you have to do this, Charles pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine panic. If those vendors go public with our non-payment, it will cause a panic among the logistics investors. The company's stock will plummet before Preston even officially takes the helm. You are intentionally sabotaging your own family. I am doing exactly what you told me to do, I replied smoothly, throwing his own vile advice right back into his face. You told me I needed to accept reality. You told me I had no assets and no leverage. You told me that I was entirely on my own. I am simply following your instructions, Charles. I am protecting my own interests. You and Catherine are going to have to bridge your own gaps. After everything we have done for you, Charles shouted, the facade of the loving father completely shattering, leaving only a vicious, cornered animal in its place. We put a roof over your head. We gave you the Harrison name. And the second we ask for a minor favor, you turn your back on us. You are pathetic, Lydia. I am independent, I corrected him. There is a massive difference. You are a petty, vindictive little girl. Charles spat, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and absolute terror. You have always been a selfish disappointment. Do not ever call us again." He slammed the phone down, terminating the connection with a sharp, violent click. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, placing it gently onto the marble counter. The insult was designed to gut me to trigger the deep-seated childhood wounds of inadequacy and rejection. But as the words echoed in the quiet, secure penthouse, they held absolutely no power. They were not the words of a powerful patriarch. They were the desperate, thrashing death throes of a man who realized he was sinking into the abyss. I looked over at Donovan, who had been listening to the entire exchange through the secure comms system. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question, asking if I was all right. I smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of pure, unadulterated freedom. "The gap is closed," I said to Donovan, turning my attention back to the massive digital workstation. "They are completely out of cash, they are out of credit, and they are out of time. Proceed to the next phase. Draft the formal corporate audit notices. We are going to rip the floorboards out from under them." Donovan's fingers danced across the illuminated keyboard. Within seconds, a certified high-priority digital package bypassed Preston's executive firewall and landed directly in his personal corporate inbox. The document was a formal, non-negotiable notice of comprehensive financial audit from Apex Holdings, the primary secured lien holder of Harrison Logistics. The terms dictated by the notice were suffocating and absolute. Preston had exactly 72 hours to produce the unredacted operational ledgers, comprehensive tax filings, and international wire transfer logs for the past 48 months. Failure to comply would trigger an automatic default, granting Apex Holdings the immediate legal right to seize all physical assets, freeze all operational activity, and terminate the current executive board. My grandfather had designed this trap with flawless precision. He had embedded covenants in the holding company charters that stripped the logistics CEO of any ability to delay or contest an audit from the shadow trust. Preston was entirely cornered by legal mechanisms he did not even know existed until this very moment. We monitored his reaction in real time through the network security overlays my grandfather had secretly integrated into the logistics company servers years ago. Preston opened the email at precisely 10:14 in the morning. For 3 full minutes there was absolutely no digital activity. He was likely frozen in his ergonomic leather chair, staring at the screen as the terrifying reality of his impending destruction washed over him. Then the panic began. The network logs lit up like a frantic distress signal. Preston aggressively accessed the restricted accounting directories, desperately trying to manipulate the master spreadsheets. He was attempting to bury the $4 million crater he had dug to feed his gambling syndicate. But financial forensics was my absolute domain. I watched him clumsily move funds from ghost accounts to operational columns, creating a tangled, amateurish web of digital forgeries. He was faking invoices, backdating phantom shipments, and creating fraudulent vendors out of thin air. "He is trying to patch a shattered dam with wet paper," Donovan observed, sipping his coffee as we watched the frantic keystrokes register on our monitoring screen. "The forensic accounting team will tear these fabricated ledgers to shreds in less than 10 minutes. He knows that," I said, my voice carrying a hard edge of satisfaction. "He knows his forgeries will not hold up to a legitimate third-party audit. He is just buying time. He is terrified. He knows that if Apex Holdings reports these glaring discrepancies to the federal authorities, he is not just facing corporate bankruptcy. He is looking at a 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. He is a rat caught in a maze, and the walls are rapidly closing in." Preston needed a miracle, and in our family, miracles were usually bought with heavy social manipulation and reckless spending. By Tuesday afternoon, the intelligence Donovan gathered revealed their desperate, coordinated countermeasure. If Preston could secure a massive immediate influx of investor capital, he could theoretically balance the ledgers just long enough to pass the Apex audit and save his own skin. But to attract that kind of capital from savvy institutional investors, they needed to project an image of untouchable, soaring prosperity. They needed to convince the city's financial elite that the Harrison family was invincible and that their logistics empire was expanding, not collapsing. Their solution was as predictable as it was pathetic. They announced the inaugural Harrison Legacy Gala. It was billed as a highly exclusive $50,000 a plate charity dinner hosted at the city's most opulent five-star hotel. The guest list included state senators, venture capitalists, rival tech CEOs, and every major socialite within a 500-mile radius. It was a desperate, glittering smokescreen designed to blind potential investors with sheer luxury. Donovan discovered the terrifying financial reality behind the event. To fund the exorbitant ballroom deposits, the celebrity entertainment, and the premium catering, my parents had completely liquidated my mother's hidden emergency jewelry collection. They had also taken out a ruinous short-term loan from an unlicensed private lender, using forged revenue projections as collateral. They were betting their absolute survival on this single evening. If the investors bought the facade and wrote checks, Preston might survive the audit. If the investors walked away, the entire family would sink into an inescapable financial abyss. I was reviewing the final legal takeover documents on Thursday evening when the private elevator to the safe house chimed softly. Vance stepped out holding a thick, gold-embossed envelope that had been delivered via private courier to my old Elm Street address and securely redirected to our downtown location. I sliced the heavy wax seal open and pulled out a heavy cardstock invitation to the Harrison Legacy Gala. A small handwritten note on customized pink stationery fluttered out and landed face up on the marble counter. I recognized Savannah's looping, arrogant handwriting instantly. Mom and Dad think it looks suspicious if the media notices you are missing, the note read. So here is a pity ticket for table 42 by the kitchen swinging doors. Try to stay out of the official event photographs. And please, Lydia, wear something nice for once, so you do not embarrass us. Do not ruin our big night. I read the note twice, letting the sheer, unadulterated arrogance wash over my skin. She was utterly broke, living on borrowed time and illegal loans, facing an eviction of her own making, and she still could not resist the burning urge to belittle me. She wanted me there to serve as a prop, the poor, unfortunate middle child sitting in the shadows while her golden siblings basked in the spotlight and collected investor checks. She wanted me to witness her final, desperate performance of superiority, to remind me of my supposedly permanent place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. I handed the pink stationery to Donovan. He scanned it, his jaw tightening with palpable disgust. I assume you want me to decline the invitation on your behalf, Donovan said, moving to toss the insulting note into the nearby shredder. We have all the documentation we need. The trap is completely set and heavily fortified. We can initiate the corporate takeover and file the criminal charges from the comfort of this room while they are busy pouring cheap champagne and lying to senators. No, I said, my voice steady and ringing with absolute certainty. Do not shred it. Donovan paused, looking at me with a raised eyebrow. You are going to attend. I am not just going to attend, Donovan, I replied, turning to face him fully. I am going to be the main event. They want to put on a spectacular show to secure their fraudulent investments. They want to parade their stolen wealth in front of the city's elite. I am going to give them the exact audience they so desperately crave. Donovan offered a sharp, dangerous smile, fully recognizing the magnitude of the play I was making. If you are going into the lion's den, Madam CEO, we need to ensure you are properly armed for absolute warfare. I will contact our lead corporate attorneys and have them prepare the final unredacted ledger projections for display. We will also need to arrange an appropriate wardrobe. If your sister specifically requested you wear something nice, we should absolutely oblige her. I nodded, the anticipation humming through my veins like a live electrical wire. Prepare the executive transport for Saturday evening, I instructed, and make sure the legal team has the foreclosure notices printed on high-quality presentation stock. We are going to serve Savannah her eviction notice right after the appetizer course. As Donovan moved to execute the final preparations, I looked back down at Savannah's discarded pink note. She had demanded I stay in the shadows so I would not embarrass them. She had no idea that by inviting me to her fraudulent gala, she had personally handed me the match to burn her entire counterfeit kingdom to the ground. The Harrison family was about to host the most expensive, highly publicized charity event in the city's history, and they were entirely unaware that the guest of honor sitting at the back table was the architect of their total destruction. The grand ballroom of the city's most historic luxury hotel was a masterclass in desperate manufactured opulence. Every single inch of the cavernous space was meticulously designed to scream infinite, untouchable wealth. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in imported ivory silk. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided flawlessly across the polished marble floors, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and glasses of vintage champagne. It was billed as a $50,000 a plate charity gala, but the only actual charity my family was interested in funding tonight was their own survival. They had spent their final heavily borrowed dollars to build this glittering stage, hoping to blind the city's financial elite with luxury so they could quietly pick their pockets. Standing near the center of the room, positioned perfectly beneath the largest and brightest chandelier, my family held court. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. My father, Charles, was deep in conversation with a prominent state senator and a commercial real estate mogul. Charles was swirling a glass of neat scotch, laughing expansively at a joke, projecting the relaxed, jovial energy of a patriarch who had absolutely nothing to worry about. My mother, Catherine, was draped in heavy emerald green velvet, wearing a spectacular diamond collar necklace that I knew for a fact had been purchased on a predatory high-interest line of credit just 3 days ago. She was effortlessly holding the attention of two major venture capitalists, gesturing gracefully as she spun a completely fictional tale about the Harrison family's dedication to global philanthropic initiatives. But Preston was the main event. He stood near the front of the room by the polished wooden podium, flanked by the executive board members of 3 major logistics investment firms. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, looking every inch the visionary, confident corporate CEO. I watched from the shadows of the outer vestibule as he aggressively sold them on his lies. I could hear snippets of his booming, arrogant voice carrying over the string quartet playing in the corner. He was pitching a massive multi-state warehouse expansion, promising these men staggering quarterly returns if they bought into his vision tonight. He was desperate. He needed their capital injected into his operational accounts by tomorrow morning to cover the $4 million he had embezzled, and he was lying through his teeth to get it. Savannah was hovering near the expensive floral photographer's backdrop, wearing a heavily sequined silver gown that caught the flash of the cameras every time she shifted her weight. She was pretending to care about the clean water initiative the gala was supposedly funding, while expertly steering every single conversation with the wealthy guests back to her upcoming luxury wellness brand. They were all completely intoxicated by their own illusions, utterly convinced they had successfully papered over the massive gaping holes in their financial reality. I did not sneak in through the service elevators. I did not slip quietly into the back row to find table 42 as Savannah had instructed in her malicious little pink note. I waited in the vestibule until the ballroom was at maximum capacity, until the string quartet reached a soaring dramatic crescendo, and then I gave the signal to the hotel staff. The heavy gilded double doors at the main entrance swung open simultaneously. I stepped over the threshold and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The music did not stop, but the conversations nearest the door certainly did. I was not wearing a cheap dress or a subdued apologetic outfit. I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue power suit cut from imported Italian wool. It was razor-sharp, immaculate, and radiated absolute uncompromising authority. I wore no flashy jewelry, only a simple vintage silver watch that had belonged to my grandfather Harrison. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe style that left my face completely exposed. I did not look like a discarded homeless daughter seeking a free meal from her wealthy relatives. I looked like a corporate executioner arriving to collect a massive debt. But it was not just my appearance that caused the whispers to ripple rapidly through the crowded ballroom. It was the people walking directly behind me. I was flanked by Arthur Donovan, who wore a pitch-black suit and a look of cold, predatory anticipation. Behind him marched a phalanx of 6 top-tier corporate litigators and forensic accountants from Apex Holdings. They moved in perfect, synchronized formation, men and women in sharp, dark suits, carrying heavy leather briefcases. Those briefcases were packed with unredacted financial ledgers, certified foreclosure notices, and federal audit mandates. We moved through the room like a localized hurricane, parting the sea of glittering socialites and confused tech executives with sheer, imposing momentum. Savannah spotted me first. She was mid-laugh, posing for a photograph with a local media personality, when her eyes locked onto my approaching formation. The color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. Her jaw actually dropped, destroying her carefully practiced photo-ready smile. She panicked, immediately abandoning the photographer and practically sprinting across the ballroom floor in her high heels to grab my mother's arm. Catherine turned her polite, high society smile freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as she registered my presence and the imposing legal team marching steadily behind me. They moved quickly, desperately trying to intercept me before I could reach the center of the room. Catherine and Savannah cut through a narrow gap between 2 dining tables, rushing to block my path just as I passed the kitchen's swinging doors where they had originally intended to hide me. "Lydia, what on earth do you think you are doing?" Catherine hissed, keeping her voice trapped in a harsh, frantic whisper to avoid drawing the attention of the politicians standing 10 feet away. She grabbed my forearm, her manicured nails digging painfully into the wool of my jacket. "You are supposed to be out of sight at table 42. And who are these people? You cannot just drag your pathetic freelance friends into a $50,000 a plate event." Savannah stepped up right beside her eyes darting nervously toward the front of the room where Preston was still talking to the investors. "You look completely ridiculous," Lydia Savannah spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You wore a boring business suit to a black tie gala. You look like a bank teller. You are embarrassing us in front of the most important people in the city. Tell your little entourage to leave right now and go sit in the back before Dad sees you and has hotel security throw you out onto the street." I did not shrink away from them. I did not lower my eyes, and I certainly did not offer a defensive explanation. I looked down at my mother's hand gripping my sleeve. I did not move to brush it off. I simply stared at her fingers until the sheer freezing intensity of my gaze forced her to slowly, awkwardly release her hold. "You seem highly agitated for a woman hosting a charity event." "Catherine," I said, my voice carrying a smooth, resonant calm that stood in stark contrast to their frantic, desperate whispering. "I received a formal invitation to this gala. It specifically requested my presence. IRSVPD, yes. And as for my wardrobe, Savannah, I am dressed exactly appropriately for the business I am about to conduct tonight." "This is not a business networking event for your failing agency," Catherine demanded, her eyes wide with mounting panic as she realized she could not easily intimidate me into submission. "You are ruining a critical night for your brother. You have absolutely no leverage here, Lydia. Turn around and walk out those doors before you humiliate yourself permanently. I will call the guards over here right now and have you dragged out if you take one more step toward that stage." I smiled. It was the exact same cold, calculated smile I had given them in the sunroom when they demanded I beg for a job. "I highly doubt you want to involve security tonight, Catherine," I replied softly, "because if the authorities arrive, they are not going to escort me out. They are going to escort your son out in handcuffs. Now you are blocking the aisle." Before my mother could utter another threat or raise her voice, Donovan stepped smoothly forward. He did not yell, but the sheer, imposing mass of his presence forced both Catherine and Savannah to take an involuntary step backward. "Excuse us, ladies," Donovan said, his tone chillingly polite, but vibrating with an undeniable heavy threat. "The chief executive officer has a very tight schedule to keep tonight, and we are already running 30 seconds behind. We need to access the front of the room." Catherine gasped, her eyes darting wildly from Donovan to me, the words "chief executive officer" completely failing to compute in her desperate, scrambling mind. Savannah looked at the team of lawyers behind me, finally realizing that these men and women were not freelance graphic designers or minor accountants. They were apex predators of the corporate legal world, and they were staring at her with absolute terrifying indifference. I did not wait for my mother to recover her breath. I stepped right through the physical gap they had left, completely bypassing their frantic, pathetic attempts to hide me in the shadows. I did not look back at them. I kept my eyes locked firmly on the front of the room, marching directly toward the brightly lit stage where Preston was currently holding court. The whispers in the ballroom grew significantly louder, swelling into a palpable buzzing wave of confusion and electric anticipation. The wealthy investors and high society guests parted like the Red Sea, stepping aside to let my legal team pass. They could all sense that something massive was about to happen. My family had spent their last borrowed dime to set this beautiful glittering stage to lie to the world. Now I was going to use their expensive platform to end them. Preston stood at the polished wooden podium, looking out over the crowded ballroom with an expression of absolute manufactured confidence. He leaned casually against the microphone stand, projecting the image of a seasoned executive who was entirely comfortable managing billions. The string quartet had faded into the background, and the gentle clinking of silverware had stopped as the wealthy attendees turned their attention toward the stage. This was the moment Preston had gambled everything on. This was the pitch that was supposed to save him from federal prison. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and honored guests. Preston began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing perfectly off the vaulted ceilings. Tonight we celebrate more than just a legacy. We celebrate the dawn of a massive, unprecedented expansion for Harrison Logistics. Under my leadership, we are not just maintaining the empire my grandfather built, we are aggressively evolving it. He paused, flashing a brilliant practiced smile that I knew he had rehearsed in front of a mirror. He gestured expansively with his hands, drawing the investors into his web of deceit. In the coming quarter, we are launching a multi-state infrastructure initiative that will double our operational capacity. Preston continued, his tone smooth and persuasive. We are opening 3 new automated distribution hubs on the East Coast, and we are completely overhauling our proprietary routing software to ensure Harrison Logistics remains the undisputed apex predator in the global supply chain market. For those of you who have already committed capital to this expansion, I guarantee your returns will be historic. For those of you considering joining our venture tonight, I assure you there has never been a more secure, lucrative time to partner with the Harrison family. It was a phenomenal performance. If I had not spent the last 48 hours tearing apart his fabricated ledgers, I might have believed him myself. He was selling them a ghost ship, promising them a luxury cruise, while the hull was already resting firmly on the ocean floor. I did not wait for him to finish his grand concluding remarks. I did not wait for the polite applause. I stepped forward, leaving my legal team in their unyielding formation near the center tables, and marched directly toward the stage. The guests nearest the center aisle noticed me first. They parted instinctively, stepping aside as my heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Preston. I watched the exact moment he realized I was walking toward him. His practiced, confident smile faltered. His eyes widened, darting quickly from my face to the imposing legal team standing firmly behind me, and finally to Donovan, who was moving swiftly and silently along the right flank toward the sound engineering booth. "What is she doing?" Preston muttered the microphone, picking up his frantic whisper and broadcasting it across the silent ballroom. He turned quickly to the side of the stage, motioning frantically toward 2 burly hotel security guards stationed near the exit. "Stop her! Get her out of here right now!" The guards stepped forward, raising their hands to intercept me. But before they could even cross the floor, Donovan materialized from the shadows, stepping directly into their path. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his dark suit, pulled out a thick laminated document bearing the official seal of the state judiciary, and held it up for the guards to see. "Apex Holdings Private Security Protocol." Donovan stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried absolute authority. "We are executing a federal corporate audit on the primary leaseholder of this event, Step back, gentlemen. You do not have jurisdiction here. The guards looked at the official documentation, looked at the sheer imposing mass of Donovan, and immediately stepped back, lowering their hands and retreating to their posts. They were hotel employees. They were not going to interfere with a federal corporate action. Preston panicked. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning stark white. He leaned directly into the microphone, his voice sharp and cracking with genuine fear. Security. I am the CEO of Harrison Logistics. I demand you remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing. I reached the base of the short set of stairs leading up to the stage. I did not break my stride. I walked right up the steps, my gaze fixed firmly on my brother. He took a stumbling step backward, almost tripping over the microphone cord. He looked completely terrified, realizing that the protective bubble he had always relied upon had just violently burst. I stopped less than 2 feet away from the podium. Preston opened his mouth, likely to yell for our father or to hurl another insult, but I did not give him the chance. I raised my hand and made a sharp, definitive cutting motion toward Donovan, who was now standing directly inside the sound engineering booth. Donovan hit the master switch. The audio cut out instantly. The low hum of the speakers died, plunging the massive ballroom into a sudden, shocking silence. The string quartet stopped playing. The waiters froze mid-stride. 500 of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city stared in absolute stunned fascination at the stage. Preston tapped the microphone frantically, but it was completely dead. He looked out at the silent, expectant crowd, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He turned to me, his chest heaving. "What are you doing, Lydia?" he hissed, his voice trembling with unchecked rage. "You are ruining everything. Get off my stage before I have you arrested." I looked at my brother, taking in his expensive tuxedo, his panicked eyes, and the sheer pathetic desperation radiating from his entire body. He still thought he was in control. He still thought he was the golden child. "This is not your stage, Preston," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly calm, ensuring only he could hear me. "And those investors out there are not your salvation. They are your witnesses." I turned away from him and faced the ballroom. The silence was heavy, thick with anticipation. Everyone was waiting to see what the woman in the midnight blue suit was going to do next. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek, wireless microphone that Donovan had secured for me. I clipped it to my lapel and tapped the side twice. The sound system flared back to life, carrying the sharp, crisp taps across the room. I stepped up to the podium, physically pushing Preston aside with my shoulder. He stumbled, completely overwhelmed by my absolute refusal to back down. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting smoothly and powerfully through the ballroom, commanding the attention of every single person present. "My name is Lydia Harrison. And despite what the gentleman standing behind me just told you, I am not here to celebrate an expansion. I am here to execute a hostile takeover." A collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw state senators leaning forward in their chairs. I saw venture capitalists setting down their champagne glasses, their eyes narrowing with sudden intense focus. They were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. My brother Preston just stood before you and promised historic returns on a massive new infrastructure initiative. I continued, my tone clinical, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. He promised you that Harrison Logistics is expanding its operational capacity and overhauling its proprietary routing software. It was a compelling pitch. However, there is a fundamental flaw in his proposal. I paused, letting the tension build to a fever pitch. Preston Harrison does not own the proprietary routing software, I stated clearly. He does not own the operational patents. He does not hold the controlling voting shares of the primary holding company. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, he does not even have access to the corporate bank accounts. Preston lunged forward, grabbing my arm, his face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate fury. "Shut up," he snarled, trying to physically drag me away from the podium. "You are insane. She is lying. She is a disgruntled, disinherited thief." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned my head and looked at Donovan, who was standing by the sound booth. Donovan moved faster than I had ever seen him move. He crossed the stage in 3 long strides, clamped a massive hand onto Preston's shoulder and forcibly yanked him backward. Preston stumbled and fell hard onto the polished wooden floor of the stage, his expensive tuxedo jacket tearing at the seam. "Do not touch the chief executive officer," Donovan warned, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. The ballroom erupted into chaotic murmurs. Investors were pulling out their phones, frantically texting their analysts. Catherine and Savannah were standing near the front tables, clinging to each other, their faces completely drained of blood. Charles was pushing his way through the crowd, his face purple with rage, but he was blocked by my wall of corporate litigators. I turned my attention back to the crowd. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings," I announced, my voice cutting through the rising noise and instantly silencing the room again. Apex Holdings is the primary secured lien holder for every single asset associated with Harrison Logistics. We own the software, we own the patents, we hold the primary debt on every warehouse Preston just promised to expand. I looked down at Preston, who was scrambling to his feet, looking around wildly for anyone to save him. There was no one. His kingdom was gone. "And the reason Preston is standing here tonight desperately begging you for capital," I continued, ensuring my voice reached every corner of the room, "is because he needs your money to cover the $4 million he has systematically embezzled from the operational accounts over the past 48 months. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the terrifying, heavy silence of a bomb detonating in a crowded room. Preston froze, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. He knew it was over. He knew the numbers were out. I had not just crashed his party, I had publicly executed his entire fraudulent empire. Donovan signaled the audio-visual booth. The massive digital banners behind me, previously projecting the gold Harrison Legacy Gala logo, flickered and went entirely black. A sharp gasp rippled through the sea of investors. A fraction of a second later, the twin 60-foot screens flared back to life. They were no longer displaying promotional marketing material. They were illuminated by the harsh, glaring white background of raw, unredacted financial spreadsheets. I turned slightly, gesturing to the screens with a calm, open hand. "If you look at the columns highlighted in crimson," I said, my voice echoing with crystal clarity over the silent crowd, "you will see a detailed ledger of the Harrison Logistics operational accounts. Specifically, you are looking at the maintenance and fleet upgrade budgets from the past 48 months. Preston, acting as Vice President of Operations, authorized over 200 individual payouts to a vendor listed as Crescent Supply Solutions." I tapped the wireless clicker Donovan had placed on the podium. The screen zoomed in on the specific vendor payouts. "Crescent Supply Solutions is not a logistics vendor." I continued, locking eyes with a prominent venture capitalist sitting in the front row. "It is a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, explicitly operated by an offshore gambling syndicate. Over 4 years, my brother funneled exactly $4.2 million of company revenue into this account to cover his catastrophic personal betting losses." Preston lunged towards the microphone again, his face slick with panic sweat. "It is a lie," he screamed, his voice raw and echoing without the amplification. "She hacked the system. She photoshopped these documents because she is a bitter, disinherited loser. Do not look at those screens." I did not even blink. I pressed the clicker again. The screen shifted, displaying a scanned copy of a wire transfer request. "This is a wire transfer initiation form dated yesterday morning at 9:14. I stated, slicing through his hysterical shouting. "It contains Preston's personal digital signature authorizing an emergency transfer of $7 million. He attempted to use 3 of your primary operational warehouses as collateral for a predatory bridge loan to patch the hole in his accounting before our audit commenced. The transfer was denied because he does not own the warehouses. Apex Holdings owns them. He is standing here tonight begging for your investment capital because his bookie gave him a deadline, not because he is building new infrastructure." The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The lead investor from Vanguard Financial, sitting at the center table, slowly set his champagne glass down and pulled out his phone, rapidly typing a message to his legal team. The state senator sitting next to him stood up, signaling to his aides that they were leaving immediately. They were sprinting away from the blast radius. Savannah could not take the silence. She pushed her way to the edge of the stage the sequins on her silver gown catching the harsh light of the financial projections. "You are a monster!" Lydia Savannah shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing across the ballroom. "You are ruining our family over jealousy. Turn those screens off right now. Dad, make her turn them off." I looked down at my sister. She was clutching her designer evening bag, her face contorted with the same vicious, arrogant entitlement she had displayed on my front lawn just 2 days ago. She still thought she could order me around. I pressed the clicker. The massive screens shifted instantly. The logistics ledgers vanished, replaced by a series of high-resolution property deeds and rejected loan applications. "I am so glad you spoke up, Savannah," I said, my voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that somehow felt even more threatening than a shout. "Because the investors in this room deserve to know exactly who is managing the Harrison family fortune." Savannah froze her eyes, darting up to the 60-foot projection of her own signature. "My sister recently inherited $15 million on paper," I explained to the captivated audience. "However, due to probate transition periods, that cash is temporarily inaccessible." Unwilling to wait, Savannah attempted to secure a massive line of revolving credit. If you look at the document on the left, you will see she used the Harrison penthouse in Manhattan as her primary collateral. Savannah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked completely paralyzed, like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "There is only one problem with that application," I continued, my voice entirely devoid of mercy. "Savannah does not own the penthouse. My grandfather transferred the deed to Apex Holdings 3 years ago. Savannah committed felony bank fraud by attempting to leverage an asset that legally belongs to my holding company. She currently owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to luxury contractors for a pool house she planned to build after illegally evicting me from my home. Her credit cards are declining. Her accounts are frozen. The golden daughter of the Harrison Empire is entirely bankrupt." The humiliation was absolute. Savannah clutched her stomach, looking physically ill. The high society guests she had spent the entire evening trying to impress were now staring at her with open, unvarnished disgust. The illusion of her flawless, wealthy influencer lifestyle was shredded into a million irrecoverable pieces. She let out a choked, humiliated sob and buried her face in her hands, entirely unable to handle the public exposure of her own fraud. Charles could no longer contain himself. My father stormed down the center aisle, shoving past a group of stunned tech executives. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The patrician charm he had worn all evening was completely gone, replaced by the vicious, cornered desperation I had witnessed in the sunroom. "Shut this down immediately!" Charles roared, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "You ungrateful, vindictive wretch! I am your father, and I order you to step down from that stage. You are destroying this family." I gripped the edges of the wooden podium. I looked down at the man who had demanded I hand over the keys to my home. I looked at the man who had told me I was a selfish disappointment for refusing to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. "I am not destroying this family, Charles," I said, my voice ringing with a terrible absolute finality. "I am simply turning on the lights." I pressed the clicker one final time. The screens behind me split into two separate displays. On the left side, the official financial summary of the Harrison Legacy Gala was projected. On the right side, the personal credit ledgers of Charles and Catherine Harrison appeared, highlighted in glaring red negative integers. "Let us talk about the event we are all attending tonight," I announced, addressing the hundreds of guests who were watching the collapse of a dynasty in real time. "You were all invited here under the guise of philanthropy. You paid $50,000 a plate to support a clean water initiative. But if you look at the gala financing documents on the screen, you will notice something deeply concerning." I pointed to the left screen. This entire event, the crystal chandeliers, the beluga caviar, the premium open bar, was funded by a high-interest short-term loan from an unlicensed private lending firm. A loud murmur of outrage swept through the room. Several guests literally dropped their silverware in shock. "My parents are not wealthy philanthropists," I stated, bringing the hammer down with surgical precision. They are financially ruined. They have leveraged every single asset they possess just to maintain their country club memberships. They liquidated my mother's emergency jewelry collection just to pay the deposit on this ballroom. They invited you here tonight to rob you blindly. They needed your charity donations and your corporate investments to pay off the loan sharks who funded this exact dinner. You are not guests. You are their bailout plan. Catherine let out a sharp, hysterical scream from the front row. She covered her ears, her diamond collar necklace catching the harsh light of the projection screens as she collapsed into a chair, entirely unable to withstand the absolute destruction of her social standing. The prominent politicians and socialites she had been courting just moments ago physically backed away from her, creating a wide circle of isolation around my mother. They looked at her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Charles stood at the base of the stage, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked up at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so profound it was almost tangible. "You are dead to us," Charles hissed, his voice shaking with impotent rage. "You will never be a part of this family again." I looked down at my father, feeling nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. The fear, the desperate need for their validation, the endless cycle of rejection, it was all completely gone. "I stopped being a part of this family the day you evicted me to build a swimming pool," I replied smoothly. "I am not your daughter anymore, Charles. I am the CEO of Apex Holdings, and as of this exact moment I am calling in your debts." I turned away from my father and faced the massive crowd of investors one last time. The room was buzzing with furious, frantic energy. Security guards from the hotel were standing by the exits, unsure of what to do, while the elite guests began gathering their coats and preparing to flee the disastrous event. For those of you who have already written checks tonight, I strongly advise you to contact your banking representatives and issue an immediate stop payment order. I advised, my tone returning to the crisp, professional cadence of a fraud investigator, concluding a major briefing. Any funds deposited into Harrison Logistics or the Harrison Family Foundation will be immediately seized by Apex Holdings to settle their outstanding defaulted debts. You will not see a single return on your investment, and your capital will be consumed entirely by their bankruptcy proceedings. The lead investor from Vanguard Financial, the same man who had been considering pouring millions into Preston's fictional expansion, walked right up to the edge of the stage. He did not look angry with me. He looked at me with profound, calculating respect. "Ms. Harrison," the investor said, his voice carrying clearly over the murmuring crowd, "can you guarantee the authenticity of these federal filings?" I nodded firmly. "My team has provided hard copies of the unredacted ledgers, complete with federal authentication seals, to the legal counsel waiting in the lobby. You are welcome to take a packet on your way out. Apex Holdings values absolute transparency." The investor nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. He turned and looked at Charles and Preston, his expression curling into one of absolute disgust. "You will be hearing from our legal department regarding your fraudulent representations tonight. Do not ever contact my firm again." With that, he turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. It was the signal the rest of the room needed. The mass exodus began. State senators, tech billionaires, and high society influencers surged toward the doors, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Harrison family. The grand ballroom, which had been a glittering testament to their stolen power just 20 minutes ago, was rapidly emptying out, leaving only half-eaten meals and abandoned champagne glasses in its wake. I stood at the podium, surrounded by the flashing screens of their financial ruin, and watched them lose everything. Charles could not process the reality of the room. His brain, wired for decades to reject any narrative where he was not the absolute victor, simply short-circuited. He lunged toward the stage again. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. He pointed a trembling, manic finger at me. "She is insane!" Charles roared, his voice cracking violently under the strain. "Do not listen to a single word this woman says. She is a bitter, delusional liar. She hired hackers to fabricate these documents because she is obsessed with destroying us." He turned his back to me, facing the rapidly thinning crowd, holding his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. "You know me. You all know the Harrison name. We have done business together for 30 years. We built this city's supply chain. Are you really going to let a disgruntled, estranged daughter with a vendetta convince you to abandon a billion-dollar expansion? These screens are a parlor trick. It is a pathetic, illegal stunt. He was sweating profusely now. The pristine image of the billionaire patriarch was melting off his face, revealing the terrified, hollow man beneath. He looked frantically at the few remaining tech executives and politicians who had paused near the exits, watching the spectacle with morbid fascination. "Stay," Charles begged, the command completely gone from his tone. "Sit down. We can explain everything. The logistics company is perfectly solvent. We are opening the new hubs. The returns are guaranteed." The silence that answered him was deafening. Nobody moved back toward their tables. Nobody reached for their checkbooks. Donovan stepped down from the stage, his movements smooth and predatory. He held a secondary wireless microphone in his right hand. He walked straight down the center aisle, bypassing Charles completely, and approached the lead executive from Vanguard Financial, who was still standing near the front row with his legal team. The executive, a sharp-featured man who managed billions in institutional wealth, watched Donovan approach with calculating, ice-cold eyes. Donovan extended his hand, offering the microphone to the executive. Sir Donovan said, his voice carrying effortlessly without amplification. "As the senior fiduciary representative in this room, perhaps you could put Charles's mind at ease regarding the authenticity of the documents currently displayed on those screens." The executive took the microphone. He did not look at Charles. He did not look at my mother, who was still sobbing quietly in her chair. He looked directly at the 60-foot projection of the federal tax ledgers and the offshore wire transfer logs. He adjusted his glasses, his expression carved from granite. "Charles," the executive said into the microphone. His voice boomed through the ballroom, devoid of any warmth, any friendship, or any mercy. "My compliance team has just run the digital watermark serial numbers displayed on the bottom right corner of these projections. They cross-reference the filing codes directly with the federal database." Charles swallowed hard, his hands dropping to his sides. "Please, you have to know she fabricated the numbers." "The documents are authentic," the executive stated, dropping the final crushing weight onto my father's chest. "These are certified, unredacted federal filings. The SEC tracking numbers are active. The offshore transfer logs match the exact timestamps of the holding company's primary ledger. Your son transferred $4 million to an illegal gambling syndicate, Charles. Your daughter attempted to leverage a penthouse she does not own. Your family is entirely insolvent." The executive lowered the microphone. He looked at Charles with absolute, unvarnished disdain. "You invited us here to steal our capital to cover your son's felony embezzlement." The executive continued, handing the microphone back to Donovan. "You looked me in the eye 20 minutes ago and promised me a 30% yield on a logistics expansion that does not exist. You are a fraud, Charles. Your entire family is a liability. If I ever see you or your son approach my firm again, I will personally ensure the federal prosecutors have you remanded without bail." The executive turned his back on my father. He signaled his legal team, and together they walked out of the grand ballroom, not looking back once. Charles collapsed inward, the fight completely drained out of him. He stumbled backward until his legs hit the edge of a dining table, and he sank into a chair, staring blankly at the floor. The great Charles Harrison, the man who had evicted me from my home with a smug smile, was now a broken, publicly humiliated shell. I turned my attention to the right side of the room. Savannah was still on her knees near the floral backdrop, her silver sequined dress pooling around her on the marble floor. She was hyperventilating, her mascara running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. She was clutching her phone, likely watching her credit alerts trigger one by one as the banks froze her accounts. "Savannah," I said, my voice projecting clearly from the podium. She flinched violently at the sound of her name. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen her display. The arrogant influencer, the sister who had packed my belongings in garbage bags and mocked my lifestyle, was completely gone. "The 90-day transition hold on your inheritance is not a bureaucratic delay," I informed her, ensuring the remaining guests heard every single word. "It is a permanent freeze. Apex Holdings has officially called in the primary debt on the family estate. Because you attempted to commit bank fraud by leveraging a property you do not own. The holding company has accelerated the collection process. I nodded to the team of corporate litigators standing near the stage. The lead attorney, a tall woman in a sharp gray suit, walked deliberately toward Savannah. She carried a thick, heavy manila envelope. Savannah scrambled backward on the floor, trying to get away from the attorney. No. Stop. Get away from me. The attorney did not stop. She reached Savannah and dropped the heavy envelope directly onto her lap. You are officially served, the attorney stated clearly. Those are the formal foreclosure notices for the Manhattan penthouse, the Malibu estate, and the primary residential properties listed under your name. Apex Holdings is seizing the assets to settle your outstanding debts. I leaned into the microphone. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the penthouse, Savannah. I recommend you use the premium garbage bags you bought for me on Wednesday. They will be perfect for your designer wardrobe. Savannah let out a gut-wrenching wail, dropping her face into her hands as the reality of her total, inescapable poverty crashed down upon her. She had nothing. She had no home, no money, and no social standing. She was utterly ruined. Finally, I turned my gaze down to the stage floor. Preston was still sitting there, clutching his torn tuxedo jacket. He was staring at the projected ledgers of his gambling debts, his mouth opening and closing silently. The arrogant golden child who had relentlessly bullied me, who had deliberately sabotaged my career and slandered my name to federal compliance officers, was reduced to a trembling, pathetic mess. Preston, I said. His name echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. He slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face slick with sweat. Lydia, please, he whispered the microphone, picking up the faint, desperate sound. Please, I can fix this. I can pay it back. Do not send me to prison. You cannot pay it back. Preston, I replied, my voice completely stripped of mercy. Because you do not have a job. I picked up a single sheet of paper from the podium. It was the executive termination order drafted and notarized by Donovan just hours ago. Under the corporate bylaws of Harrison Logistics, any executive officer found committing felony embezzlement triggers an immediate non-negotiable transfer of voting rights to the primary lien holder. I read aloud, translating the legal jargon into absolute reality for him. Because you stole $4 million from the operational accounts, you breached your fiduciary duty. Apex Holdings now controls 100% of the voting shares. Preston shook his head rapidly, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. No. Grandpa left the company to me. It is my company. It was never your company, I corrected him sharply. It was a test, and you failed miserably. As the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings, I am officially announcing the immediate hostile takeover of Harrison Logistics. I looked down at him, feeling the absolute crushing weight of 33 years of toxic abuse finally lifting off my shoulders. You are terminated, Preston. Effective immediately. You are no longer the CEO. You are no longer an executive. As of this exact second, you are legally classified as a trespasser on corporate property. Preston buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. He had lost the empire. He had lost his freedom. The federal agents would be knocking on his door before the weekend was over. I looked out at the grand ballroom. The few guests who had lingered to watch the carnage unfold were now silently, rapidly moving toward the exits. They did not speak to my parents. They did not offer condolences or support. They actively turned their backs on Catherine Charles Preston and Savannah. The high society crowd, the very people my family had sacrificed my sanity and my childhood to impress, discarded them without a second thought. The Harrison family was officially radioactive. They were pariahs. Within 5 minutes, the massive glittering room was completely empty, save for the catering staff and my legal team. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of Savannah's weeping and Preston's jagged breathing. I unclipped the wireless microphone from my lapel and set it gently on the wooden podium. I did not need to say another word. The truth had done all the heavy lifting. I stepped down from the stage, walking past my brother, past my sister, and past my parents. They did not try to stop me. They did not utter a single word of protest. They were entirely, utterly broken. Donovan fell into step beside me, the legal team forming a protective wedge behind us as we walked toward the heavy, gilded double doors. I pushed them open, stepping out of the ballroom and into the quiet, brightly lit lobby of the hotel. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with clear, fresh air. The toxic, suffocating fog of my family's empire was permanently behind me. The hostile takeover was complete. Checkmate. Monday morning arrived with a brutal, uncompromising clarity. I did not return to the safe house. Instead, I instructed Vance to drive me directly to the Harrison Logistics corporate headquarters. The glass and steel tower, which Preston had treated as his personal playground for the last 5 years, was already swarming with Apex Holdings security personnel. Donovan had spent the weekend locking down every physical and digital access point. When I walked through the revolving doors, the lobby was dead silent. Employees stared in stunned fascination as I bypassed the reception desk, flanked by the same corporate litigators who had stood behind me at the gala. We took the executive elevator straight to the top floor. Preston's corner office was a disaster zone. The heavy wooden door was wide open. Inside, Preston was frantically shoving paperwork into a leather briefcase, his tie undone, sweat staining the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He had spent the entire weekend ignoring calls from his gambling syndicate and desperately trying to find a defense lawyer who would take his case without a massive upfront retainer. He had failed on both fronts. "You cannot be here," Preston stammered, dropping a stack of folders as I stepped over the threshold. "This is my office. I am still the vice president of operations until the board votes otherwise." "There is no board anymore, Preston," I said smoothly, stepping fully into the room. "Apex Holdings dissolved the executive committee at 7 o'clock this morning. Your security clearance was revoked on Saturday night." Before he could launch into another pathetic, arrogant tirade, the heavy glass doors at the end of the executive suite swung open. 4 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers stepped into the hallway. They did not look like hotel security guards. They moved with absolute terrifying purpose. Donovan had handed them the unredacted financial ledgers, the wire transfer logs, and the offshore gambling syndicate routing numbers first thing Sunday morning. The federal prosecutors had not even waited for regular Monday business hours to sign the warrants. Preston Harrison, the lead agent, announced, stepping into the office and completely ignoring my presence. "You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." Preston froze. The color drained from his face so quickly he looked like a corpse. He looked at the agents, then he looked at me. His arrogant sneer finally shattered, replaced by the pure, unadulterated terror of a man who realized his actions finally had permanent consequences. "Lydia, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic whine. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them the money was a sanctioned corporate expense. I am your brother. You cannot let them do this to me." I looked at the brother who had systematically tried to destroy my career just days earlier. I looked at the man who had called my clients and branded me a thief to save his own skin. "I do not involve myself in federal investigations, Preston," I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am simply the auditor who found the discrepancies. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." He began to sob openly as the agents roughly spun him around, snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. They read him his rights as they marched him out of the corner office, parading him past the glass walls of the executive suite where dozens of his former employees watched the golden child of the Harrison Empire get dragged away in disgrace. I watched the elevator doors close on his weeping face, feeling absolutely nothing but the cool, refreshing breeze of closure. While Preston was being processed at the federal holding facility, Savannah was experiencing her own brand of spectacular devastation. The foreclosure notices my attorneys handed her at the gala were not empty threats. By Tuesday morning, the bank had formally frozen all her joint accounts. Her husband, a superficial real estate developer who had only married her for her presumed access to the Harrison billions, wasted absolutely no time saving himself. The moment he realized Savannah was completely insolvent and that her family was the subject of a massive federal fraud investigation, he filed for expedited divorce. He did not just file for divorce. He ruthlessly protected his own premarital assets, locked her out of their shared accounts, and legally distanced himself from her fraudulent loan applications. He left her with nothing: no cash, no credit, and no home. I received the operational report from Donovan on Wednesday afternoon. Apex Holdings had officially seized the Manhattan penthouse. Savannah had been given 72 hours to vacate the premises. I authorized Donovan to send a team of private contractors to ensure the property was cleared without incident. When the contractors arrived, they found Savannah sitting on the floor of the lavish master bedroom, completely surrounded by piles of designer shoes, imported handbags, and custom evening gowns. She had no movers, she had no staff. She could not afford to hire anyone to help her pack. The contractors handed her a stack of the exact same premium heavy-duty black trash bags she had dumped on my front lawn the week prior. According to the report Donovan filed, Savannah screamed at the contractors, threw a crystal vase against the wall, and then ultimately collapsed into hysterics as she was forced to stuff her $2,000 dresses into garbage bags. She dragged them down to the service elevator herself, her perfect influencer facade utterly destroyed. There were no cameras documenting her exit. There were no social media followers cheering her on. She left the building in complete, humiliating silence. The final phase of the collapse centered on my parents. Catherine and Charles had spent their entire lives treating their sprawling, massive suburban estate as an impenetrable fortress of wealth and superiority. But a fortress built on secret high-interest loans and fraudulent collateral cannot withstand a targeted financial siege. By Thursday, the private lenders my parents had used to fund the disastrous charity gala realized they were never getting their money back. To mitigate their losses, they immediately initiated aggressive collection proceedings. However, they quickly discovered that Apex Holdings held the senior lien on the primary estate. I authorized our legal team to accelerate the collection of all outstanding debts. The math was brutally simple. My parents owed tens of millions of dollars, and they had absolutely zero income. The foreclosure was swift, clinical, and completely devoid of mercy. Catherine and Charles were ordered to vacate the mansion by Friday evening. They attempted to call in favors from their wealthy friends, begging for temporary housing or short-term loans to fight the seizure in court. But the social execution I had orchestrated at the gala was absolute. Nobody answered their calls. Nobody responded to their frantic emails. The country club formally revoked their membership due to non-payment of dues. The elite society they had worshipped had completely eradicated them from their ranks. With no other options, Charles was forced to sign a lease on a cramped, severely downsized apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was a modest two-bedroom unit with linoleum floors and thin walls, a place Catherine would have previously described as unfit for human habitation. They had to leave behind the antique furniture, the imported artwork, and the luxury vehicles, all of which were seized by the creditors to partially satisfy their monumental debts. They did not even get the luxury of suffering in peace. On Saturday morning, Savannah showed up at their new apartment with her garbage bags full of clothes. With nowhere else to go and absolutely no marketable skills to support herself, she was forced to move into the tiny second bedroom of her parents' rented apartment. The golden child, the arrogant patriarch, and the superficial matriarch were now trapped together in less than 900 square feet of living space. They had no money, no social standing, and no one to blame but themselves. They were forced to look at each other every single day, completely stripped of the wealth they had used to mask their profound toxic dysfunction. I sat in my new sunlit office at the logistics headquarters, reviewing the final asset transfer documents. The hostile takeover was fully complete. The arrests were made, the properties were seized, and the debts were settled. The Harrison family had spent 33 years trying to make me feel small, insignificant, and powerless. They had evicted me from my home simply to build a swimming pool. They had slandered my name to destroy my business. They had laughed while attempting to steal the inheritance my grandfather had specifically set aside to protect me. Now Preston was sitting in a federal cell facing a decades-long sentence. Savannah was sleeping on a cheap mattress in a cramped apartment, entirely dependent on parents who were practically destitute. Charles and Catherine were banished from the society they loved, forced to live out their days in the exact kind of modest working-class conditions they had spent their entire lives mocking. I closed the financial dossier and placed it neatly into my desk drawer. The brutal, rapid fall of the Harrison Empire was not a tragedy. It was a precise, perfectly executed correction of the universe. I had not destroyed them. I had simply held up a mirror, forcing them to face the catastrophic consequences of their own actions. And as I looked out over the city I now controlled, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. That profound peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. The transition from the old Harrison Logistics to the new Apex Holdings-controlled entity was rigorous and demanding. I had spent the entire morning authorizing a comprehensive overhaul of the employee benefits package, meticulously repairing the severe damage Preston had done to the workers' pension funds during his tenure. The executive floor was a sanctuary of quiet productivity, completely stripped of the arrogant frat house energy my brother had aggressively cultivated. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a series of international shipping contracts when the pristine silence of my corporate sanctuary was violently shattered. The heavy frosted glass doors to my executive suite flew open with a sudden jarring crash. I looked up from my digital tablet to see my mother and father physically pushing their way past my terrified executive assistant. They had apparently tailgated a catering delivery crew through the ground floor security gates and used Charles' lingering knowledge of the underground freight elevators to bypass the biometric scanners in the main lobby. They looked entirely unrecognizable from the imperious billionaires who had sneered at me in their sunroom just 1 month ago. Catherine was wearing a beige trench coat from at least 3 seasons ago, her hair completely lacking its signature immaculate salon blowout. She looked haggard, her posture stripped of its usual aristocratic arrogance. Charles looked physically shrunken. His off-the-rack suit hung loosely off his frame and his face was pale-lined with deep, dark exhaustion. They looked like refugees fleeing a war zone of their own making. Catherine burst into loud theatrical tears the absolute second she made eye contact with me. She rushed forward, stopping only when Vance, my personal security lead, stepped swiftly out of the shadows and blocked her path with his massive frame. She clasped her hands together, holding them against her chest in a gesture of pure manufactured desperation. "Lydia, please!" Catherine wailed, her voice echoing shrilly across the polished marble floors of the executive suite. "You have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left. The apartment is freezing. The landlord is threatening to evict us because Savannah's credit check failed, and Savannah just cries all night in the second bedroom. We are living like animals. Please, Lydia, you have made your point. You won." Charles stepped up beside her, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder to present a united front of parental suffering. "Lydia, I am begging you," he said, his voice cracking with a forced, practiced humility that made my skin crawl. "We have lost the house. We have lost our friends. Preston is sitting in a federal holding cell, and no legitimate defense lawyer will even take our calls without a $500,000 retainer. We are a family. We are blood. We made some terrible, catastrophic mistakes, but you are our daughter. You cannot just leave us to die in the streets." I remained seated behind my massive mahogany desk. I did not stand up to greet them. I did not offer them a chair. I simply sat perfectly still and watched them perform. It was a breathtaking masterclass in emotional manipulation. They were hitting every single societal trigger point designed to inflict profound guilt on a child. They were weaponizing the concept of family demanding unconditional rescue from the very person they had ruthlessly and systematically victimized for decades. "We just need a small stipend," Charles continued, taking my silence as an opening, his eyes darting frantically around the luxurious office. "Just a minor monthly allowance to survive, or a consulting contract, something quiet. We will stay entirely out of your way. We will never ask for the company back. Just give us enough to secure a decent townhouse and pay for your mother's medical expenses." You control billions now, Lydia. 100,000 a year would be a rounding error for Apex Holdings. It would cost you absolutely nothing to save your parents. I looked at Charles. I looked at Catherine. I searched their eyes for a single ounce of genuine remorse, a single shred of actual maternal or paternal love. There was none. Their eyes were darting around my office, calculating the square footage, assessing the expensive artwork on the walls, looking hungrily at the very wealth they believed they were still inherently entitled to share. They were not looking at a daughter they had wronged. They were looking at an ATM they were desperately trying to hack. "You didn't come here for your daughter," I said, my voice cutting through their pathetic sniffling performance like a scalpel. "You came here for Apex Holdings." Catherine gasped, placing a trembling hand over her mouth. "How can you say that? We came here because we love you. We came here to apologize." "You did not utter a single word of apology until you were completely bankrupt," I replied, my tone flat, clinical, and entirely unyielding. "When you had your mansion, your country club, and your stolen millions, you told me I was a toxic disappointment. You told me I was entirely on my own. You explicitly ordered me to vacate my home so Savannah could have a swimming pool. You watched Preston destroy my independent career, and you fiercely defended his actions. You only discovered your parental affection the exact second the bank froze your credit cards. We were blind." Charles pleaded, stepping closer to Vance's imposing blockade. "We were blinded by the money and by Preston's lies. We see the truth now. You are the strong one, Lydia. You are the successful one. We are so incredibly proud of you. Just give us a chance to prove we can be a real family again." "Proud of me," I repeated, letting a short, humorless laugh escape my lips. "You are not proud of me, Charles. You are terrified of me. And you are starving. You do not want a relationship with your daughter. You want a parasite's access to my host company. You want a stipend so you can pretend you are still part of the financial elite. You want to use my money to fund Savannah's influencer delusions and hire criminal defense attorneys for a son who embezzled $4 million. Catherine dropped the weeping act entirely. The sweet, desperate mother vanished in a fraction of a second, and the vicious, cornered socialite snapped violently back into place. Her face twisted into an ugly, bitter sneer. "You owe us." Catherine hissed, her true toxic nature completely unmasked. "We gave you life. We raised you. We put clothes on your back. You cannot just hoard all this wealth like a greedy dragon and leave your own flesh and blood to rot in some filthy apartment block. It is unnatural. It is evil." "What is evil," I countered, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the cool surface of the desk, "is building a family dynamic based entirely on financial extortion and psychological abuse." You taught me the rules of your game very clearly, Catherine. You taught me that compassion is a weakness to be exploited. You taught me that resources are only allocated to those who submit to your control. I was an excellent student. I learned your lessons perfectly. I picked up the desk phone and pressed the speed dial for the main security hub downstairs. "Donovan," I said, keeping my eyes locked firmly on my parents. "We have 2 unauthorized trespassers in the executive suite. Please bring an escort team immediately." "They are on their way, Madam CEO," Donovan replied through the speaker, his voice tight with professional urgency. "My apologies for the breach. The ground floor security protocols are being aggressively rewritten as we speak. Cancel the police response," I instructed smoothly. "I do not want them arrested for trespassing. I just want them removed. Permanently." Charles's face drained of all remaining color. He realized the begging had failed. He realized the guilt trip was utterly ineffective against the titanium armor they had forced me to build. He tried one last desperate tactic. He tried to invoke the ghost of the man who had orchestrated this entire reckoning. "Harrison would be disgusted with you." Charles spat, his voice trembling with venom. "Your grandfather built this company to provide for his family. He would never want to see his own son begging for scraps." I stood up from my desk. I walked slowly around the mahogany woods, stopping just a few feet away from where Vance was keeping them contained. "My grandfather knew exactly what he was doing," I stated with absolute unwavering conviction. "He knew you were a parasite, Charles. He knew you and Preston were bleeding his legacy dry. He did not build this empire to fund your reckless vanity. He built it to last. That is why he bypassed you completely. That is why he handed the keys to the only person in this family who actually understands the value of hard work, integrity, and absolute accountability. I am out of the charity business. The heavy glass doors of the executive suite swung open again. Donovan strode into the room, followed by 4 large uniformed security guards. They moved with swift, silent efficiency, surrounding Charles and Catherine in a tight, unyielding perimeter. "You are not my family," I said, delivering the final fatal blow to their delusions. "You are simply 2 bankrupt individuals who managed to breach my corporate security. If you ever attempt to enter this building again, or if you ever approach my residence, I will not hesitate to have you arrested and prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law." Catherine tried to lunge forward, her hands clawing the empty air, but 2 security guards immediately caught her by the arms, restraining her with firm professional force. "You will burn in hell for this, Lydia!" she screamed, her voice cracking as they began to physically drag her backward toward the elevators. "You will die alone with all your money. Nobody will ever love you. I would rather die alone than spend one more second trying to earn the love of a parasite," I replied coldly. Charles did not fight the guards. He let them take his arms, his posture completely defeated. He looked back at me one last time as they pulled him toward the exit. There was no anger left in his eyes, only the vacant, hollow stare of a man who realized he had finally played his last card and lost the entire game. The glass doors closed behind them, cutting off Catherine's hysterical shouting. The executive suite fell back into a deep, profound silence. Vance let out a slow breath and returned to his post near the entrance. Donovan walked over to my desk, his expression apologetic. "The security flaw has been identified and neutralized," Donovan reported. "They slipped in through the underground freight loading dock. The biometric scanners have been updated to flag their facial recognition profiles across the entire campus. They will never get within 100 yards of this building again. Make sure the residential security teams have the same updates," I said, walking back to my desk and sitting down. "They are desperate. Desperate people do irrational things." "Already done," Donovan confirmed. He looked at me, studying my face for any sign of emotional fracture. "Are you all right, Lydia?" I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated panic in their voices. I thought about how easily they had tried to manipulate my empathy, weaponizing the very concept of family they had spent 33 years desecrating. And I realized that I felt absolutely nothing for them. The deep, aching wound of my childhood, the desperate need for their approval, had been completely cauterized. "I am perfectly fine, Donovan," I said, picking up my digital tablet and opening the next file on my agenda. "Let us get back to work. We have an empire to run." 1 year later, the sprawling metropolis below my executive suite looked entirely different. It was not the city that had changed, but the lens through which I viewed it. The suffocating smog of my family's toxic expectations had completely dissipated, leaving behind a clear, unobstructed horizon. The executive floor of Apex Holdings was unrecognizable from the dark, tense battleground it had been on the day I forcibly removed my parents. The heavy, oppressive mahogany paneling and the shadowed, secretive corners that Preston had favored were completely gone. In their place, I had overseen a massive architectural renovation. The walls were now constructed of reinforced, soundproof glass. Natural sunlight flooded every inch of the workspace. The physical transparency of the building was a direct, intentional reflection of the new corporate culture I had ruthlessly installed. Transforming Harrison Logistics into a legitimate ethical powerhouse had not been a simple undertaking. When I took the helm, the company was a rotting labyrinth of offshore shell accounts, ghost payrolls, and predatory vendor contracts. Preston had not just been embezzling to cover his gambling debts, he had fostered an entire executive culture of graft, bribery, and systemic corruption. But I was not a traditional logistics CEO. I was a certified fraud investigator who had spent a decade dissecting white-collar crime. I did not just manage the company, I audited it down to the bare, exposed studs. In the first 90 days of my tenure, I terminated over 40 senior executives and regional managers who had been complicit in Preston's illegal schemes. I did not offer them quiet severance packages or graceful resignations. I handed their unredacted digital footprints directly to federal prosecutors. The swift, merciless corporate purge sent a shockwave through the entire global supply chain industry. I instituted rigorous, uncompromising compliance protocols utilizing the proprietary routing software algorithms that my grandfather had secreted away in the Shadow Trust. The results of my aggressive restructuring were nothing short of historic. Stripped of the massive financial hemorrhaging caused by my family's embezzlement and reckless spending, Harrison Logistics experienced a staggering resurgence. The multi-state infrastructure expansion that Preston had falsely promised to the investors at the charity gala became a tangible reality under my leadership. We opened 5 new automated distribution hubs on the East Coast, all funded entirely by clean, verified operational capital. Profits soared by 40% in the third quarter alone. The very investors who had fled the ballroom in absolute disgust returned to the negotiating table, offering unprecedented capital backing because they knew their investments were finally protected by a CEO who valued absolute financial integrity. I had cleaned up the industry, standardized our compliance software, and solidified Apex Holdings as the undisputed apex predator of the global logistics market. I had done it all without compromising my ethics, and more importantly, I had done it completely on my own terms. I sat back in my ergonomic desk chair, letting the warmth of the afternoon sun wash over my face. The office was a sanctuary of quiet, focused power. There were no frantic phone calls from creditors, no toxic family members dropping by unannounced to demand unearned stipends, and no dark secrets hidden in the floorboards. On the corner of my pristine glass desk sat a single simple silver frame. It held a candid photograph of Grandpa Harrison. He was standing on the loading dock of his very first warehouse, wearing a faded canvas jacket, his arms crossed over his chest, and a fiercely intelligent, calculating spark in his eyes. I looked at the photograph, tracing the familiar lines of his face. He had taken a massive, unprecedented gamble on me. He had watched my parents and my siblings consume his legacy like a swarm of ravenous locusts, and he had recognized that the only way to save his empire was to hand the detonator to the outcast daughter. He knew that placing the 10-digit phone number in that blank envelope would either break me completely or forge me into titanium. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet, sunlit room, a genuine, peaceful smile curving my lips. "You knew exactly what you were doing." My private cell phone resting on the desk beside the photograph vibrated softly. The screen illuminated, displaying an incoming voicemail notification. I did not need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. The automated transcript software generated the text on the screen, translating the frantic, breathless audio into cold, hard words. It was Savannah. Over the past 12 months, the reality of absolute poverty had crushed my family with the slow, grinding weight of a glacier. Preston had recently been transferred to a medium-security federal penitentiary in upstate New York, having pled guilty to a litany of financial crimes to avoid a century behind bars. Charles and Catherine were still trapped in their cramped linoleum-floored apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their social exile was permanent. They had become a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs they used to rule. Savannah had suffered perhaps the most spectacular fall from grace. Stripped of her luxury properties, her designer wardrobe, and her wealthy husband, she was forced to work a minimum-wage retail job at a suburban shopping mall just to help our parents pay their basic utility bills. The former golden child, the influencer who had live-streamed my eviction and mocked my boring, poor lifestyle, was now folding sweaters on the clearance rack for hostile customers. I tapped the screen, allowing the audio to play on speakerphone. Savannah's voice filled my office, devoid of its signature arrogant drawl. It sounded thin, reedy, and incredibly desperate. "Lydia, please." Savannah wept, the sound of traffic humming in the background of her recording. "It is me. I am standing outside the grocery store. My debit card just declined for a cart of basic food. Dad's heart medication is incredibly expensive, and Mom cannot even afford her physical therapy copays. We have absolutely nothing. I am begging you, Lydia. I know what we did was horrible. I know I was cruel to you. I will do anything. I will clean your floors. I will work in the warehouse. Just please, please pick up the phone. We are starving. The message ended with a jagged, pathetic sob followed by the sharp beep of the disconnection. I sat in the silence that followed, listening to the echoes of her desperation fade into the vast, soundproofed architecture of my corporate fortress. A year ago, a message like that might have triggered a deep, conditioned response of familial guilt. I might have felt the insidious urge to rescue them, to play the role of the benevolent savior just to earn a fleeting temporary fraction of their gratitude. I might have convinced myself that their suffering was my responsibility to fix. But as I looked around my beautiful, thriving empire, I felt an absolute profound stillness in the center of my chest. There was no guilt. There was no lingering trauma pulling at my conscience. There was only the clinical observation of a consequence meeting an action. I reached out and picked up the phone. I did not text her back. I did not call the grocery store to anonymously pay for her cart. I did not offer her a job in my warehouses. I pressed the delete button. The voicemail vanished from the server, permanently erased from my device and my life. I blocked the new prepaid number she had used to bypass my security filters, ensuring the digital wall between us remained absolutely impenetrable. I set the phone back down on the desk. As I did, a monumental realization washed over me, settling deep into my bones with the warmth of the afternoon sun. The true inheritance my grandfather had left me was never the billions of dollars. The money was simply a tool, a mechanism of enforcement. The real legacy, the greatest gift he had ever given me, was the absolute, undeniable power to finally stop seeking validation from people who were entirely incapable of loving me. For 33 years, I had believed that if I just worked a little harder, if I just proved my intelligence a little more, if I just stayed quiet and absorbed their abuse, they would eventually see my worth. I had tied my own value to the opinions of a family entirely consumed by greed, vanity, and profound toxic dysfunction. My grandfather had stripped away the illusion. He had forced them to reveal their true monstrous faces in the stark, unforgiving light of day. He had given me the power to see them not as my family, but as the parasites they truly were. In severing my ties to them, I had not lost a family. I had gained myself. I had gained the freedom to build a life based on integrity, authenticity, and actual measurable merit. I had surrounded myself with a team of professionals who respected my leadership. I had cultivated a network of clients who trusted my judgment. I had built a thriving, beautiful existence that belonged entirely to me, untainted by their manipulation and their lies. Donovan knocked softly on the glass door of my office, breaking me from my reverie. He stepped inside, holding a sleek leather portfolio containing the final acquisition contracts for a rival European logistics firm. The legal team in Frankfurt has signed off on the primary clauses. Madame CEO Donovan reported a faint, respectful smile touching the corners of his mouth. We are ready to finalize the expansion. Are you prepared to review the documents? I looked at Donovan, my most trusted advisor, the man who had stood beside me when I burned the fraudulent Harrison empire to the ground. I looked at the photograph of my grandfather, honoring the brilliant, ruthless gamble he had taken to save my soul. And then I looked out the window, watching the city move below me, a vast network of connections and opportunities waiting to be explored. I am perfectly prepared. Donovan, I said, standing up from my desk and buttoning my custom-tailored blazer. I walked over to the glass wall, feeling the absolute unbreakable strength radiating through every fiber of my being. I was no longer the discarded middle child. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was Lydia Harrison, the architect of my own destiny, the undisputed master of my own life. Leave the contracts on the desk, I instructed, offering him a bright, genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. We have a lot of work to do, and I do not want to waste a single second of it. I turned my back on the past, stepped firmly into the present, and went back to living my thriving, unapologetically authentic life. For 33 years, I believed my value was tethered to my family's approval. I allowed their constant gaslighting, their arrogant dismissals, and their blatant favoritism to make me feel like a discarded outsider. But the absolute greatest lesson I learned from my grandfather's unconventional will is this: never let people who are incapable of genuine love dictate your self-worth. When you are surrounded by toxic individuals who build their identities on lies and manipulation, your integrity is your most valuable asset. My grandfather didn't hand me $1 billion on a silver platter, he handed me a single index card. I could only wield the power of that phone number because I had already built my own foundation. I had spent years cultivating my skills as a fraud investigator, securing my own income, and forging an unshakable moral compass. Financial independence and professional competence are the ultimate shields against emotional and financial extortion. Society often conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, demanding unconditional loyalty regardless of the cost to our mental health. But sharing DNA does not give anyone a free pass to exploit, demean, or destroy you. Walking away from a toxic family dynamic isn't a failure, it is a profound necessary act of self-respect. True power materializes the exact moment you stop seeking validation from those who only wish to tear you down. I transformed my exclusion into a thriving empire, and you have the absolute strength to reclaim your own narrative too. Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary with relatives who constantly underestimated your worth? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my journey of executing the ultimate corporate checkmate resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about uncovering the truth and taking back your power.